Hello there, and welcome back to another video. This is the 6th episode of the story about how Naruto's life changed after the seal shattered. He's been thrust into Anbu. He's losing track of which half of him is him and which half is his demon. He can't seem to find his way back to Team 7, and he's been having these strange dreams, with a sky ripped apart by a broken moon, a man with a staff, and a version of himself with glowing, nine-tomoe eyes. This story is from Slexensky. Make sure to support him, her. Like and subscribe to show your support. Let's get this party started. Naruto? Sakura leaned over him, her soft hair falling over the both of them. Are you alright? Disoriented and knocked from his equilibrium, Naruto attempted a wan smile. He ran a hand through his hair and wondered how long he'd been here. Had he spent the night again? I'm fine. Sakurai was just lost in thought. This seemed to placate her, the tension seeping out of her shoulders. Oh, okay. You look a little strange. Do I? Naruto blinked. Come to think of it, he felt really strange. He also felt like someone had tossed him off a cliff. Everything ached. The pain seeped into his very bones, like he'd been fighting for the better part of last night. And, considering he didn't even remember what he was doing last night or, for that matter, most of yesterday, that could very well be true. Have you been sleeping? Sakura put her hands on her hips. Because I've been read some medical texts and they all emphasize how important and effective sleep is as a vehicle of, yes. He interrupted, before she could really get going. Don't worry, Sakura-chan. I've been getting plenty of rest. She appraised him critically. Well, if you're sure. Fortunately, she did not have the opportunity to evaluate him further, as a delicate tap alerted them both to another presence. Yugao swung into the open window, crouched on the sill and leaning against the side, framed against a bright blue sky and rapping her knuckles lightly against the wall. Am I interrupting something? She drawled, bored. Sakura flushed bright red. And no. Not at all, Anbu-san. She gave a captious look Naruto's way. I figured you might be here. Naruto blinked. Your house appears to have been empty for some time judging by the dust and rancid smell. She said by way of explanation. Naruto blanched. Yeah, about that. She shook her head with a look of fond exasperation. No. It's fine. I think it's best for my sanity to not know what I walked into. Naruto belatedly noticed the sliver of parchment curled in her hand. Mission. He sighed. Should I get ready? She gave him a brief smile. 1200, she said, before she flipped backwards out of the window, as graceful as she had come. Sakura looked a bit terrified at the acrobatics, but Naruto was sure Yugao undoubtedly landed on her feet, and probably made all the boys in a 4-mile radius swoon as she did so. He turned to his pink-haired ex-teammate. I'll catch you later, huh? He smiled, quick and rueful. Sure. She agreed. And then, hesitant, take care, Naruto. Always. He smiled. Naruto turned an appraising eye around the city's walls. Absolutely crawling with Anbu. For the most part, he knew there were more than he thought, but that being said, no matter their numbers, Anbu were almost impossible to find when they didn't want to be found. And yet, he could count at least a dozen just in his field of vision, and that was without trying all that hard to look. He could spot out the outline of Yamato's hair some ways above them on the wall. He appeared to be speaking avidly with another Anbu captain. Did something happen? He wondered aloud, mostly to himself. Did something happen? Tao heard him, and echoed him with suspended disbelief. Are you serious? Naruto blinked rapidly, turning back to his teammate. Yes? He returned, slowly. Tao sputtered inelegantly. Celebration, Koga cut in quickly, a bottle of sake in his hands. That is what's happening. You want some? Naruto threw his hands up apologetically. Oh, no, thank you, you're bringing sake on a mission? Yugao cut in, sneering. Yes, it's a celebration. Koga interrupted her with great cheer. Celebrate, rookie. Ding dong, the motherfucking witch is dead. I'll take some if you don't mind, thanks. Tawa grabbed the bottle out of his hands, procuring a cup seemingly out of nowhere and pouring himself a glass. Naruto watched the proceedings with great incredulity, wondering if he'd stepped into some kind of hallucination or, alternatively, his teammates had been possessed by pod people. Only Yugao remained staunchly unchanged, folding her arms and looking upon her fellow Anbu with resignation and irritation. He turned to her, as Tawa and Koga began to link arms and sing some sort of strange folk song, sake sloshing around. Their jovial attitude increased tenfold as another Anbu team leapt above them, greeting the sight with a lot of cheery yelling, that Tawa and Koga returned. One even dropped from the air to give them some ecstatic high fives, before returning leaping away. Do I even want to know? Naruto asked at length. A very disliked man died. Yugao huffed by way of explanation. Though I was no great fan of him either, I always believe it dishonorable to be rejoicing at the butchering of another human. She aimed that last part scathingly at their two teammates. Tawa and Koga only saluted their cups together, cheering. Disliked? Naruto blinked. That's putting it mildly. Yugao seceded, somewhat begrudgingly. Especially in our line of work. If she was really attempting to clear this up for him, she was doing a poor job of it. Naruto wasn't anywhere close to making sense of this than he was 5 minutes ago. That better not be what I think it is, Yamato intoned mildly, dropping down from where he'd been discussing something up on the wall with another Anbu captain. Naruto had never seen so many Anbu in one place, well, one that wasn't headquarters. But there were black speckles dotting the walls and leaping over the sprawling cityscape, and it seemed everywhere he looked there were a few out conversing. What the hell happened last night? Both Tawa and Koga looked successfully cowed, downing the rest of their cups before they attempted to covertly toss them away, attempted and missed by a mile. Yamato looked nonplussed. Sorry, Taicho. Neither of the two looked all that apologetic. Just, you know. Big day and all. I'll say. Yamato snorted. He held up their mission scroll. We're off for a brief stint around the Kyumo border. The daimyo's shitting out diamonds to get these bandits out of the way. Bandits? Yugao repeated, blinking, unfurling her own scroll. That's it? They must be incredibly skilled, if the daimyo's willing to pay this much for it. Actually, I think his mistress lives in that town. Yamato returned, dry. But, well, who are we to get in the way of that? Naruto, who was still feeling particularly lost and confused, scowled indecently. That's great and all, but will someone tell me what the hell is going on in our own town? Yamato turned to him. Danzo Shimura is dead. He deadpanned, as if that meant anything to Naruto. His brows furrowed. Who? Danzo Shimura Izer was, at Yugao's amendment, Tawa and Koga high-fived, one of the advisors of the Hokage. She took a breath. He was also responsible for the inauguration of the Anbu segment, Rooter, NE. I'd wager that most of Konoha has no real opinion on him, but here in Anbu he's very unpopular. He disrupted a lot of policies the Hokage put in place and often undermined Hokage-sama's position. It was incredibly vexing for some time. Long story short, Tawa added. Everyone here is pretty happy to see him gone. Yamato nodded. An emergency meeting has been called at Hokage Tower. Well, it's in intermission right now, which is why so many of the Black Ops are out. The Hunter-nin found his body floating in the Nakano River this morning, Koga elaborated, with a truly alarming amount of enthusiasm. Completely butchered. I heard they had to identify him by his dental records. Tao quipped. No way. Koga marveled. Oh, enough. Yugao huffed. We've got a mission. Let's get on that, huh? Couldn't have said it better myself. Yamato smiled. It shouldn't take us more than a few days, but I'd like to wrap this up quick. I may not be celebrating at the thought of his death, he shot a narrowed look to his two subordinates. But I do want to see how the proceedings play out. He clapped his hands. So. Are we all ready? Nothing about this day sat well with Naruto. He'd had a sinking feeling something was amiss since he had awoken earlier today in a pile of his own drool, once again passed out with his head pillowed in his arms, leaning against Sasuke's bed. The Uchiha continued to sleep like the dead. He hadn't even moved. The doctors said nothing physically was wrong with him, but that kind of mental trauma would take a while to heal. Naruto supposed it was best that he had this mission to occupy his thoughts. From both the Uchiha and whatever the hell was going on with himself. Naruto looked up to catch Yamato glances back at him. The captain returned his gaze forward the moment Naruto lifted his eyes. He frowned. The mission went off without a hitch. That was to say, it made for a handful of incredibly painful hours of doing mostly nothing. Yugao and Yamato scouted. For about 2 hours, which meant Naruto, Koga, and Tao were left to entertain themselves for the duration, and it was only after the reconnaissance was finished and plans were approved that Naruto saw anything approaching action. For bandits, he mused, they had their strengths. They were bandits, however. And they were the highest-ranked Anbu team in Konoha. Suffice to say, the mission itself took a diminutive amount of time in comparison to how long it took for them to travel there to do it in the first place. Even more surprising, Kurama didn't even attempt the pretense of being involved. Naruto attempted multiple, half-hearted attempts to wake him up, to no avail. Though the blonde was infinitely more confident in his abilities, he wasn't anywhere near comfortable with performing at ANBU level without any input from the fox. Fortunately, his worries were in vain. Most of the hard work, planning, had already been squared away by Yamato and Yugao, and all that was left was to execute. That, apparently, he was quite good at. Naruto frowned as he rubbed absently at his elbow, the bruise already well on its way to healing back up, the only injury he'd sustained during the fight. Koga had complained viciously and intermittently about his sprained thumb, but everyone ignored that on principle. And anyway, considering those were the only 2 outstanding injuries for what was classified as an A rank, there was no real reason to complain. Yugao had said as much to their whining comrade, but in much more politically incorrect terms. Yamato halted them about halfway back to Konoha, with about another half-day's worth of travel, as the sun had long since set. We'll make camp here, he decided, surveying the blanket of trees above them. Tao snorted, and Koga made a suspicious remark about Yamato having ulterior motives. Namely, not wanting to be roped into forever using his Mokuton Jutsu for repairs and being dragged away from more missions. Their captain studiously did not remark upon this. He did, however, make them a tree house among the branches, which shut up Naruto's wayward teammates fairly quickly. After Yugao had spelled up a genjutsu around the whole thing, the team settled in for the night in their temporary lodgings. Aside from a few bugs that got unsettled around by the jutsu, the place was rather cozy. Naruto was almost ready to drift off the moment they got comfortable. Had been strangely tired the entire day when Yamato slid in place next to him. His captain didn't say much, though, whittling away at some sort of wooden trinket. Naruto watched curiously for a few moments. He'd noticed Yamato enjoyed making them during downtime, but he'd never gotten a close look at it. This one looked like a demented version of one of Kakashi's dogs. The blonde lost interest soon thereafter, lulled into sleep by his aching tendons. He felt like he'd fought an army and then some, and all he'd done today was bat away at a couple of rogue bandits. How are you, Naruto-kun? Tenzu murmured, just as he was about to drift off. Huh? He sputtered awake, rubbing the sleep out of his eyes as he tried to make sense of Yamato's words. Oh. I'm good, thanks. And you? Fine. Was the response. Not too tired? Naruto peered at him under his lashes, wondering what this was about. Yamato had yet to look up from his strange dog contraption, but Naruto had long since learned that where his captain's eyes were and where his attention was were two entirely separate things. I'm alright. He answered, evasively. And Kyubi? Okay. Naruto blinked rapidly. This was starting to get strange. And leading. What was he going for here, with all these pointed questions? It was clear that Yamato was aware of something. That perhaps Naruto was not. I wouldn't know. He answered, honestly. Haven't felt anything from him all day. I'd say he was dead, but that's clearly impossible. He must be sleeping. Yamato finally gave up the pretense at working on his figurine which, at this point he had ruined from strange dog into avant-garde abstract art. Do you remember anything from last night? Naruto blinked again, slow. No? Yamato's eyes narrowed, and he looked up from his work to study their team. Yugao was out on the porch taking first watch, and Tawa and Koga were on the roof, smoking pipes and attempting to talk quietly. For the most part, aside from attuned ears, they were incredibly alone. Finally, his eyes slid to Naruto. Kyubi approached me last night. At this, Naruto really grew confused, tensing almost involuntarily. Okay? He drawled, slowly. For what? That's what I would like to know. Yamato returned, ominous. He asked more questions. Along the lines of what we had discussed earlier. Discussed. Oh. On Itachi? Naruto frowned. That was strange. And rather arbitrary. What for? Why? Naruto asked. Yamato shook his head. I was hoping you might hold some answers to that. I don't know anything. Naruto confessed. I can't remember anything from last night. Yamato's brows rose. Nothing at all? He leaned closer, lowering his voice. Naruto nodded. Nothing. I woke up in the same place though. I didn't feel any different air, well, not really. How do you mean? Naruto rubbed the back of his head. I don't know how to explain it, I am just tired. I feel like I ran a marathon. Or 8. His expression quickly turned pensive. Do you have any injuries? No? He shook his head, sighing. That might not mean anything. You do heal rather fast. Why? He sat up. Why would I have any injuries? Do you know what I did last night? No. He let out a breath. Nothing concrete. But Naruto. His gaze was piercing, austere and concerned. Danzo Shimura was murdered last night. And there was no concrete proof, but it was rumored that he had played a large role in making decisions about the Uchiha. Naruto's eyes widened. He murdered them? Yamato hissed, clasping a hand over Naruto's mouth. Not so loud. He hissed. And then, with some exasperation. Of course not. We all know who did. But I'm not saying he was entirely without blame. Naruto's mouth opened, first with shock, then outrage. What a bastard. He scowled, keeping his voice down with a pointed look from Yamato. He blew a raspberry. No wonder everyone was celebrating at his death. Yamato's mouth thinned. Well, I can't fault you on that one. He shook his head. Either way, Naruto, he was murdered last night. I'm not being accusing, I am just pointing out the facts. Danzo surrounds himself with some of the most dangerous the Black Ops has to offer, at any given time of the day. He was an incredibly paranoid man, rightfully so. He'd made more than a few enemies in his heyday. Naruto's brows knit in confusion, wondering where his captain was going with this. It came quite suddenly to him, Tenzu's eyes sliding away. What I'm trying to say is that whoever managed to get through all his guards, not to mention the man himself, who though old, was by no means defenseless. Well, that person had to have a few things, the element of surprise, and strength. And an ability to combat the Sharingan. The last one really threw the blonde for a loop. What does that have to do with anything? Tenzu shook his head. Never mind that. Naruto, do you know anyone who might have that? He balked. No one? That sounded impossible. Maybe like Kakashi or something. Wait. Tsunade? She'd certainly have the motive, if what everyone's been saying about the guy was true. But he couldn't image a woman freaked out by blood brutally ripping apart a guy. You. Tenzu answered for him. Naruto choked. Well, Kyubi, at any rate. Tenzu amended. The blonde sputtered. He looked around wildly. Fortunately, their team was still occupied. What do you mean? He bit out, hysterical. How could Kyubi? Why? Tenzu shook his head. I'm afraid I can't answer that. Naruto, I'm not saying this is concrete, I'm simply conjecturing. You don't know this, but Danzo has long since wanted you. For his own motives. I'm sure you must have some idea what Jinchurikis are normally used for, what with the Suna incident. Naruto nodded, numbly. That would certainly give Kyubi hiding in your body ample reason to walk in there, and be greeted only with benediction. He'd have the element of surprise. And he's quite powerful, as I'm sure you know. Sure, Naruto allowed, slowly. He searched Yamato's face, wondering how much he knew. Naruto had been very keen on keeping his Sharingan far away from prying eyes. So unless Kyubi had been using it while he was unawares, Yamato should be none the wiser about its manifestation. Luckily enough, the man answered his questions before he could really start to worry. This is even less common knowledge. But the reason for so much prejudice against the Uchiha in the first place was that it was rumored that there was some kind of connection between Nine-Tailed Demon Fox and the Sharingan, that there was some kind of connection between them and the attack. It wouldn't be that much of a stretch to assume it went both ways. His eyes widened. Oh. Hell. When he put it like that. He might have. Naruto said, stupefied. I mean, he totally could have. It makes sense. Yamato shook his head. Maybe. But, the most important part is missing from this, the motive. What motive could Kyubi have had? Does he ever need a motive to kill people? Naruto snorted, incredulous. Yamato's gaze turned pensive. Perhaps. He allowed, leaning back against the wall. I don't have much empirical evidence to refute that, but it doesn't seem like him to murder without motive. Naruto turned to him, dubious. Are you serious? Yamato made a noncommittal noise. I'm not saying he couldn't. The man allowed. But, without a motive, I don't think he would. He turned to Naruto seriously. And I'm not saying he doesn't have one, I am simply saying if he does, I don't know of it. Okay. Naruto agreed, voice small. But. Do you think he did? Yamato sighed, shrugging. I wouldn't know, Naruto. He settled in more comfortably next to the blonde. No one would. Naruto swallowed. Except for him. Was it you? He accused, once they'd made it back to the village. The first thing Naruto had done after he split from his team was seat himself in front of Ichiraku and order 5 simultaneous bowls of ramen. They bitched and moaned about having to once more attend the Hokage's emergency meetings, and Naruto was only too glad to hightail it out of there before he could be roped in two. It appeared that the only people who held Danzo Shimura's death with any significant regard aside from blatant celebration were the Hokage's advisors and some of the council members. The Anbu didn't seem capable of containing their imminent joy at his demise. Afterwards, he sat there for the better part of an hour and systematically ingested their contents, waiting patiently until the fox stirred. When he did about halfway into Naruto's third, the blonde immediately ambushed him. The fox made a harumphing noise. Was it me who what? Killed him? Naruto scowled. That guy. That everyone's talking about. That has the whole village holed up in meetings. Or at least, it seemed like that. Or maybe the people Naruto associated with were staring to also be the people who would be held up in meetings like that. Naruto wasn't sure how he felt about that. What guy? Kurama snorted. How am I to know who you speak of, Naruto? Furthermore, what reason would I have to murder a man I do not know? What reason do you have for doing any of the shit you do? Naruto returned, pointedly. Don't try to play me. Know you have your own agenda, that you conveniently forget to tell me of at the most inopportune of times. I don't know what you're talking about. The fox replied, coolly. Naruto, has it ever crossed your mind just why you find that once difficult tasks have become second nature to you? Naruto blinked. Like what? Oh, things you undoubtedly no longer pay attention to. The fox mused. Water walking? Any form of chakra control, at all? Performing jutsu that you don't even know? Does any of that sound familiar? Well, sure. Naruto allowed, and then, scoffing, oh. So you've just been training this whole time? He retorted, acerbic. Clearly it needs to be done. The fox hissed. Be fortunate this mortal body you own isn't nearly as susceptible as others, else nothing I do would be of any significant benefit. Naruto glowered. The fox made a convincing point. But rarely did Kurama tell him everything. Sure, what he said made ample amount of sense, but that sure as hell wasn't going to stop Naruto from questioning his true motives. He was just contemplating how best to connive the answer out of the fox when he involuntarily dropped his chopsticks. The shift caught him surprise, his muscles seized, he felt his fingers turn to rust and the breath in his throat hitch. The change enveloped him with little else, and suddenly his fingers deftly caught the chopsticks before they fell, and all the tendons in his body relaxed again, without his doing. Kyubi stood, sniffing the air. Naruto sputtered. He said, eloquently. A little warning next time, yeah? Kyubi purred, and an anticipation and bloodlust that wasn't his pooled in his stomach. I smell some snakes. Kyubi sniffed the air again, shoving the ramen out of the way. And the Uchiha. Naruto gaped. What? The fox threw some coins down, before jumping into the skies, making for the Hokage tower. However, he kept his head tilted into the oncoming wind, gaze focused at the front of the city. By the gates. Then why are you going in the opposite direction? He shouted wildly. Kyubi didn't pay him any concern, taking off with enough speed to crack the tiles beneath him. Kyubi! Naruto shouted again. Do you remember what happened in that forest? Kyubi asked, in what seemed to be a completely different vein of thought. Naruto balked. What does that have to do with anything? That snake. Kyubi murmured. He put some kind of mark on the Uchiha. Your Jounin-sensei attempted to curb its tendencies. But alas, a seal like that won't be deterred by something as simple as a redirection of chakra. Naruto thought on this. Could you take it off? Perhaps. The fox answered, enigmatic. Naruto changed tact. Would you? The fox didn't answer for a few moments, soundless as he bounded across the city. I may just have to. He glowered, at length. For it appears this Uchiha will forever be an unending hindrance towards my plans. What the hell does that mean? It means that, in this, we have the same goals. Kyubi replied. Clearly you weren't paying much attention. As usual, in the forest, Orochimaru revealed his plans to use the Uchiha as his next body asked. Specifically for the Uchiha to seek him out for more power. Naruto recoiled. Yeah, exactly. He's gonna use him as his new body. Why the hell would he go to him? Kyubi sighed. Unfortunately, your wayward teammate does not appear to share your logic or, for that matter, any at all. And then, before Naruto could respond, above all else, what does Uchiha Sasuke value? Naruto paused. Himself? No. Kurama snorted. And then, power. Naruto sneered in disgust. From that snake? Though it would not seem likely, he does appear to have some marginal amount of usefulness. It appears that your friend finds worth in this. Well, there's no way in hell I'm letting him go to Orochimaru. Naruto snorted. I'd rather beat him into the ground and drag his sorry ass back home than let that happen. As would I, Kyubi agreed, silently. He would not lose an Uchiha so easily. Especially when there was an obvious and simple solution in his midst. If he wanted power, Kurama would simply have to provide. Yugao. The woman blinked, shaking her head to clear her daze. This meeting was mind-numbingly boring. An absurd amount of Anbu and Jounin were packed into the Hokage's meeting room, which at best could hold about 24 people. They'd broken that record and then some. The council took the actual seats, the rest of them were made to stand against the wall, find seats among the rafters, or out of the windows. Unfortunately, after returning from their mission to find that the talks were still in place, she'd been stuck hanging half outside a window, squashed next to a drooling Shikaku. It seemed they were here for no real reason either, as the proceedings moved like molasses. Half the council was as ecstatic as the Anbu. The other half, backing the advisors, appeared stern and unmoved by the blatant jovial attitude of the room. The Hokage herself looked about as bored as Yugao, and doing a piss-poor job of hiding it. She was also into her 5th cup of sake. Yamato shifted beside her, and suddenly, a blonde tuft of hair emerged from below the window. Yugao peered down at the young Anbu hoisting himself on the window sill. Naruto-kun. She whispered, surprised. You didn't have to come. Naruto snorted. I'm not here for this waste of time. In the glimmer of sunlight, she caught the claret red beneath the mask, and stilled. Kyubi. She breathed. Yamato stiffened. Kyubi tilted his head in acknowledgement. Can we help you? Yamato asked, mild. Yes, the demon replied, smiling. Yes, you may. Yugao snorted. Yamato remained staunchly indifferent. Kyubi propped himself on his elbows, jerking a thumb behind him. I am in need of assistance. Really? Yugao replied, coolly, raising a brow. Yes. Kyubi agreed. Preferably with those bumbling fools, as well. In fact, the more the merrier. Invite your friends. Yugao scoffed, crossing her arms. For what, fox? The fox turned to her, rousing his mask from his face to grin wickedly. Why, to hunt some snakes. Doesn't that sound like fun? Yugao and Yamato turned to each other, clearly hearing the message underneath his words. 5 minutes. Yamato bit out. Kyubi nodded amiably, lifting himself onto his hands to catapult backwards, landing on the roof of a building some distance away. Yamato slid out of his sitting position, crouching on his knees. Get Tawa and Koga. Yugao nodded, austere, casting a disillusioned genjutsu and moving stealthily through the room. Yamato hopped onto the roof behind Kyubi, who had tossed off his mask to sniff into the loitering wind, stalactite still at the bottom of a searing blue sky. He approached him cautiously, nothing in the demon's movements acknowledging that he recognized Yamato was there. Nothing, until he turned to face him slightly, one alarming red eye visible through the glare of the sun. The others? On their way. Yamato responded, turning around to eye the Hokage tower. The meeting room was a dark spot full of shinobi hanging out the windows. Finally, he could make out the nondescript shapes of ninja dropping out of the room, heading their way. They dropped out of the sky, Yugao at the forefront, landing gracefully in a crouch, Tawa and Koga not too far away after. "What's all this for, Yamato?" Tawa called, bored. Yamato jerked a finger in the direction of Kyubi, who had yet to turn around. Tawa's demeanor immediately drifted into something somber. "Naruto? Guess again." Kyubi smirked, turning around. "Ah." Tawa appraised. "Kyubi. Why'd you call us here?" Yugao asked, without preamble, crossing her arms against the whipping wind. Kyubi's eyes lowered into something endless. Sound has invaded once more. The reaction was instantaneous as it was predictable. The jounin assembled immediately stiffened. Yugao swore. Yamato turned to him. "Where?" "The front gates." Kyubi cocked his head. "No, perhaps they've already departed." "Hell, if they've departed, what do we care?" Koga snorted. "With something of infinite value." Kyubi added, silencing the Anbu. "And that would be?" asked Yamato, impatiently. "The Uchiha." Kyubi smiled viciously at the visceral reaction that elicited. "I suggest we move if we want to catch them before something irreparable happens to him." With that, he took off into the Konoha skies, the 5 jounin in pursuit. 4 of them. Yamato nodded, cracking his neck and stretching out his arms, returning from his espionage. 2 miles out. They appear to be waiting. There's a signature inside the barrel, probably the Uchiha. "Waiting? For us?" Yugao murmured. Tawa blinked rapidly. "A barrel? Seriously? What the hell?" Koga shrugged. "They're outnumbered anyway. And you said they appeared young? Young enough to slip in as genin." Yamato nodded. "Their profile fits the descriptions from the sound nin recorded at the Chunin exams. And they all knew just who was responsible for the invasion." Shortly thereafter. Koga smiled, vindictive. "Well, revenge is a dish best served fresh. Shouldn't take too long." Tawa agreed. "Who's going 2-on-1? Kyubi trailed some feet behind him, still sniffing the air furtively. "No one," he replied, attention fixated on something in the distance. "This is even strength." And then, as Yamato turned around with a curious look, "I'm going ahead." Tawa balked. "Slow down there, shorty." He manfully, or perhaps foolishly, ignored the ensuing growl. "Why are you there waiting purposefully? They must have been tipped off. It's a ploy to distract us from our actual target." Tawa scowled, irritated. Taicho just said there was a signature inside that barrel they were carrying that matched genin level chakra. "A decoy." Kyubi sniffed. "The Uchiha scent leads farther away." Tawa opened his mouth. "The Uchiha is mine." Kurama interrupted, cold. "And either way, Naruto will have the highest success in retrieving the Uchiha without significantly harming him. And then, mildly, unless, of course, you'd rather have to drag him back dead. Something tells me your council will be even less pleased with that than they already are, no?" Yamato waved off Tawa's protest. "He makes a valid point." The captain decided. "Let him go." Tawa blew a raspberry. Kyubi gave a nod in his direction, ignoring his teammate entirely, before taking off into the dark canopy above. Yamato turned back to his team. "Well," he began, amiable. "Shall we?" "I swear." Sakura cried, loudly. "Shikamaru, you have to help me," she pleaded. The lazy Genin Chunin now blinked at her. "Have you told anyone else?" Sakura shook her head wildly. "No. I just woke up, it just happened. And I can't find Kakashi-sensei, or any of the Jounin-sensei. Shikamaru, I don't know what else to do." "That would make sense," Shikamaru mused, considering that all the high-ranking shinobi were currently cramped on the 10th floor of Hokage Tower. For what, however, he was still not able to discern. It appeared to be something classified. "You're sure he's in trouble?" Shikamaru wedged a finger in his ear. "He could just be, fucking with you." Sakura shook her head valiantly. "He wouldn't do that." She swore. It was perfectly possible that Sakura was making this up. Sasuke, leaving the village? Granted, he didn't know much about the Uchiha, but why would anyone leave? Usually there was a serious motive when someone left the only place they called home, along with all their safety, security, and, well, food supply and source of income. But she looked ready to fall over in terror. Maybe she had hallucinated it. Maybe the Uchiha was really that dim. All right. Shikamaru sighed. "Let me round everyone up, and we'll go search for him." "Thanks." She nodded, rubbing warily at her head, a phantom pain still lingering from when Sasuke had knocked her out. "This means a lot, Shikamaru." He shrugged. Yeah. He hedged, rolling his shoulders and moving off to find some of the other genin to help them. Sakura was right, trying to barge their way into whatever high-ranked meeting was being held would be a terrible idea. The Anbu and a large amount of Jounin had been holed up there for the better part of 2 days. Even his father wouldn't speak much of it, sloughing onto the couch with a bottle of imported beer and complaining about how shitty his life and everyone in it was. Obviously he didn't go out of his way to snoop, but just by being more observant than his peers he'd noted that there was a suspiciously large amount of Anbu in the village in plain sight, even. He couldn't recall a time he'd seen so many, but all this just simply affirmed Sakura's position. He plodded along sullenly as he thought, making his way to the barbecue stand in hopes of finding Chuji. Of course, the village liked to make a big deal about Sasuke. Surely his disappearance would be some cause for concern for them. But then that brought into question just what exactly Sakura saw and how useful that would be in convincing any of the Jounin that something was actually amiss. She seemed quite convinced that he'd gone rogue, and while Shikamaru certainly thought him capable, he didn't really see the motive. Sure, Sasuke was always broody and reclusive, but that didn't inherently mean he would turn missing mean. But then, Sakura quite clearly knew her teammate better than he did. Maybe she had more reason to see a rational connection between the two. He sighed, rubbing the back of his head. Hell. He was thinking himself in circles how troublesome. Chuji. He called, once his teammate was in sight. He was marginally, but not entirely surprised to see Inuzuka Kiba inhaling a plate of barbecue beside him. Oh, Shikamaru. Chuji greeted, around a mouthful of food. How are you? Could be better. Shikamaru digressed. Kiba slapped him on the back, leaning around Chuji and spraying a mouthful of sauce at him. Congrats on making Chunin, man. Sucks you're the only one. He nodded absently. Yeah, thanks. Hey, are you guys doing anything for the unforeseeable future? They both blinked at him. Fortunately, it didn't take much to convince them. Even less to convince the wandering Hyuga Niji and Rock Lee they'd found on their way back to Sakura. It appeared Niji was quite enthused at the idea of fighting with Sasuke, or at least, getting the opportunity to do so. Shikamaru didn't even want to touch that with a 10-foot pole, so he simply shrugged and ushered the genin along with them. Rock Lee only needed to hear, possible rematch with Uchiha Sasuke, and more importantly, Sakura, to come running. That, Shikamaru also felt he was better off not questioning. By the time they made it back to Sakura, some time had already passed, and they found the pink-haired Genin fretting worriedly by the gates. She rushed over to them once they were in sight. Finally. She breathed in relief. I thought you'd forgotten. Or worse, fell asleep somewhere. Shikamaru made a noncommittal noise. He'd be more offended, but, well, that did sound like something he'd do. Kiba cracked his knuckles, smirking. So, we're here to hunt some Uchiha? Sakura looked cross at his crudeness, but nodded. He's missing. And he's out of the village. She looked down. The problem is, I have no idea where he went off to. Kiba laughed. Well, do you have anything of his? She blinked. I'm sorry. His smell. He gestured to Akamaru, who yipped playfully at her. We just need his scent and we'll be good to go. Oh. She blushed scarlet. Well, I don't have anything of his but. She leaned down, so Akamaru could sniff her. You. Might be able to smell him on me. They all blinked in unison, brows raising. Shut up. She scowled. It's not what you think. Right. Kiba agreed with a lazy drawl. He turned back down to his dog, who had begun to sniff around Sakura. Akamaru looked back up, barking. He's got it. Let's head out. They all looked collectively at Shikamaru. Shikamaru sighed. I'm leading this, then. You are Chunin. Chuji noted mirthfully, around a bag of chips. Shikamaru looked skyward, pinching the bridge of his nose. Of course. He ushered them to follow him, before leaping off into the forests outside of Konoha. They could have been making better time, Shikamaru mused, but the fact of the matter was, they were a group of genin. Not only that, they weren't even trained for search and destroy. Or hell, any kind of searching at all, with the exception of Kiba. He almost wanted to hope that Sakura was wrong, if Sasuke truly was leaving the village. Well, Shikamaru doubted he would be doing it alone. And he doubted even more so that they'd get out of his unscathed. The four genin and their Chunin lead spent some time running through the forest at Akamaru's behest. True to Shikamaru's ominous hypothesis, Sasuke was not traveling alone. Kiba reported that Akamaru had picked up 4 other foreign smells along with the Uchiha, all headed in the same direction. He must have met up with them out of the gates. Did he say anything about where he was going? Shikamaru slowed to ask Sakura, when it became clear that this situation may turn dangerous. He'd need all the information he could get. It was always so troublesome to be taken unawares. She bit her lip. No. She admitted at last. But. During the Chunin exams, in the Forest of Death. There was this guy. Shikamaru raised a brow. And? She swallowed, gathering breath. He bit Sasuke. She grimaced. Some kind of seal. I didn't get a good look at it, but he was different, after. It was. Taking control of him. You think it has something to do with this? I'm sure of it. She nodded, grim. That guy, his name was Orochimaru. Shikamaru choked. And he said that Sasuke should come find him, if he wanted to be stronger. Shikamaru cursed. Great. Orochimaru. Clearly Sakura had no idea who he was, but Shikamaru was no stranger to that name. Missing Nin, and San Nin to boot. Just what the hell were they getting themselves into? He prayed that Orochimaru himself hadn't come to collect the Uchiha. Kiba. He barked, leaping over to the front, where Kiba and Akamaru spearheaded the group. The brunette turned to him questioningly. Does Akamaru smell any snakes? Kiba looked down curious at his dog. Akamaru paused, nose to the air, before he barked. Kiba shook his head. No, none. Why? It's nothing. Shikamaru breathed in relief. Kiba's brows furrowed. It doesn't sound like Akamaru let out a flurry of yips, and Kiba skidded to a halt, sending up a spray of dirt. Shikamaru barely had time to stop as well, nearly getting barreled over by Chuji. The group paused as Akamaru began to bark consecutively at Kiba. Kiba ignored them all, murmuring to his dog. He looked up then, face set ominously. Akamaru says he smells blood. And a lot of it. The group grew silent. Shikamaru cursed. Akamaru continued to yip, hopping to the front of their halted procession to bark alarmingly at the trees. Kiba swallowed. He also says there are more scents heading our way. Shit. Shikamaru cursed again, turning to Niji. Niji, can you? But Niji had already activated his Byakugan. The dog is right. He said, with great finality. There are 4 presences heading our direction. They appear to be quite formidable, considering their chakra signatures. Rank? Jounin, probably. Again, Shikamaru cursed. They had no more time to discuss, as suddenly all of them could feel its killer intent permeating the air like a heavy stench. Within moments an Anbu team leapt out of the trees, dropping silently and effortlessly to the ground in front of them. They took weary defensive positions, but lowered them when it became clear that these were Konoha Anbu. Shikamaru breathed a sigh of relief. Yugao paused, surveying the group in front of her. For the most part, they didn't look familiar. Well, no, one was clearly a Nara, the other a Hyuga, the third an Inuzuka, and then an Akamiki, and after that, a carbon copy of Guy. She shuddered. Oh hell, she hadn't even realized one of those existed. So there was some element of familiarity to them, at least genetically, but nothing personal. And the last, a young girl in the back with very distinctive pink hair. That, Yugao recognized. Yugao allowed herself a moment of surprise simply at the spectacle of it all. What the hell were they all doing out here? Fortunately, Yamato beat her to it. Konoha Gennin, he greeted. Anbu-san. Shikamaru nodded in response. Sorry to bother, we following the trail of 4 foreign signatures moving in this direction. Have you scouted anything? 4. Yamato cocked his head. Yes, we have. Why are you looking for them? They've taken one of our friends. Sakura interrupted. They all turned to her surprised, though Sakura looked the most shocked at her own bravery. Ah, the Uchiha. Yamato surmised. Sakura nodded, demure. Sakura's gaze flickered briefly up to Yugao, before steadfastly fixing to the ground, a blush spreading riotously over her face. She started, haltingly, Yurio guys are Naruto's Anbu team, right? Whispers spread behind her from the Gennin, and Chunin, gathered. Naruto has an Anbu team? Kiba balked. Naruto's on Anbu? Chuji questioned aloud. Shikamaru scowled lazily. You two really didn't know? Why would we know that? Kiba hissed back. Never mind that. The Nara shook his head. Yugao tilted her head. We are. She answered, with a brief glance to her team. Why are you after the Uchiha? Sakura swallowed, summoning up her nerve. We're going to bring Sasuke-kun home. She explained, with conviction. He left last night and we're going after him before that crazy snake guy gets a hold of him. Yugao snorted. Crazy snake guy. How apartment? Yamato waved them off. There's no need, Genin-san. The situation is being handled. She blinked, eyes wide. But Sasuke-kun is being handled. Yamato repeated, firmly. Whatever conviction had spread from the kids began to waver. Sakura looked between the four of them, as if finally taking in their blood-soaked attire. Naruto? She whispered. Is he okay? Yugao sighed. Nin. He's fine. She replied, striding forward and ushering them in the other direction. Now, I think it's time we all headed back. She swept a clinical eye over the group of kids assembled. I'm pretty sure most of you should still be in the hospital. Considering most of them had just gotten out of it, that wasn't an entirely inaccurate assumption. They all looked a bit cowed at that. Shikamaru sighed. So fucking troublesome. He couldn't pretend that he wasn't at least a tiny bit relieved. Two of the Anbun with a falcon mask and the other of a badger escorted them back to Konoha. The other two stayed in the clearing, murmuring quietly to themselves. He thought them to look a bit familiar, or hell, they all sort of did, considering they all wore the same uniform and bone masks. But he thought he recognized the hair on the two that stayed behind, maybe friends of his dad. They're really Naruto's Anbu team? Kiba was whispering fiercely to Sakura, as if the Anbu in front of them couldn't hear. She nodded, slowly. Yes, I'm pretty sure. I recognized the woman with the purple hair. Naruto's in Anbu? Kiba repeated, still boggled by it all. When the hell did that happen? Sakura shrugged evasively. I don't know. She hedged. Sometime before the Chunin exams. Is that why he wasn't in the exams? Chuji mused aloud. She nodded again. I think so. Kiba blinked. Is he really that strong? Sakura looked down. Naruto is. She began, soft. He's very strong. Naruto's scary. Is what she wanted to say. Naruto was terrifying. She didn't know when the blonde nuisance she had known from the academy had grown into this alarming figure off in the distance, turning around to stare her down with omniscient, godlike eyes. She shivered. In a lot of ways, Naruto awoke some integral fear within her, even when he smiled benignly at her, donning the clinging skin of his youth. Very strong indeed. Anticlimactically, Sasuke stood with his back to him, contemplating the violent river that split Hai no Kuni from its bordering countries. He had expected something more dramatic, maybe. Not the dark-haired boy, still as stone, strangely benign and almost listless as he stared at an indeterminable point in the burning sky. Naruto traced his gaze, the mountains lit up with the bitter ends of the sun. They still had a good hour or two of daylight for Naruto to whip this moron back into shape. Hey! He shouted, as he dropped out of the trees. Asshole! Sasuke's shoulders tensed. You couldn't have even said goodbye? He asked sardonically, loud over the surging waters. That's kind of fucked up, you know. He walked closer. Sasuke did not move. What, nothing to say to that? He began anew, derisiveness drifting into genuine anger. You're really that much of a coward? There is nothing more to say. Returned the Uchiha, somewhat lifeless. He still hadn't moved at all, aside from a slight swaying with a silent wind. Well, that can't be true, considering you haven't said anything to me. Naruto snorted. And then, to the Uchiha's unnerving silence. Turn around and face me, you fuck. Yeah. That anger was starting to turn a little explosive. He couldn't help it, though, all his patience or what little of it he had always seemed to evaporate in the face of the dark-haired boy. He did. Finally. I did not just chase you all the way over here to deal with this bullshit. Naruto started anew, in perhaps the most graceless way possible. He had a speech planned for this, and it had gone out the window the moment he finally got the boy in his sights. Sasuke sneered. No one asked you to come all the way out here, moron. Go back to your precious Anbu if it means so much to you. Stop being such an asshole. He cut him off, angrily. He wanted Todo shove Sasuke's face into the dirt until he saw reason, or maybe dunk him head first into the waterfall. Maybe the cold water coupled with the fall would knock some sense into the boy's head. Naruto took a breath. They were both being obstinate little fucks. And losing his temper was going to accomplish absolutely nothing. Hell. When had he become the more mature of the two? You know you're just as important to me, no, fuck it, you're so much more important to me than any of them. Or anyone else I know. You're my best friend, my only friend, and... The words felt raw even before they left his mouth, cutting up his insides with sharp edges, dragging through his heart. Maybe because of how genuine they were, as if he laid bare all he had to hide. I'd chase you to the end of the earth, okay? I mean, I might, punt you off the edge in anger, but the point is that I would. And Jesus, don't act like you don't give two fucks about anything, because we both know that's not true. Naruto swallowed. Two livid red eyes turned to him, so violent they could have seared the earth into tinder and ash just from their gaze. Naruto held them, though, unable, or perhaps unwilling, to look away. Sasuke had long since drifted into silence, and Naruto wasn't sure what to make of it. Was this progressor? Was Sasuke simply shutting himself completely from him? The thought made him a little hysterical. There had to be a way back to the boy. Had to be a way to get through to him. Fight me. Naruto blinked out of his reverie. What? Fight me. Sasuke repeated, dark and tenebrous. Why? Naruto balked. He opened his mouth again, but Sasuke didn't wait for him to finish, turning around and charging at the blonde. Naruto withdrew his sword on instinct, parrying Sasuke's kunai and completely forgetting what kind of sword he was wielding. Sasuke's eyes widened as the metal of his kunai melted on impact and dripped searing liquid iron onto the ground, leaping away with a hiss. Naruto, for his part, was just as surprised by the events, staring incredulously at the smoking remains of Sasuke's weapon. The Uchiha scowled, putting distance between him and the blonde. He flew through hand seals, placing them up to his mouth and spitting a fireball in Naruto's direction. The blonde felt chakra surge through his fingertips without his will, manipulating the fireball to harmlessly catapult into the tree line. Oh, hell. Naruto blinked, watching it erupt the forestry into flames. He hadn't come here for a fight. Well, okay, he'd kind of figured that might be a plausible outcome when he'd been chasing Sasuke down, but that wasn't entirely what he'd come for. At one point, he would have loved to go head-to-head with the Uchiha, if only to prove himself to the other boy. But his need for approval in his strength had long since come and gone. He thought he knew that he was powerful in his own right, and he didn't need a fight with his rival to prove it. He didn't want Sasuke to acknowledge his strength, he already knew he had it. He wanted Sasuke to acknowledge him. Fight back. He bellowed, charging Naruto again. The Anbu ducked under his strike, whirling around to deflect a barrage of shuriken sprayed his direction. He rolled into a crouch, holding the hilt of his sword in his mouth as he flittered through hand seals he couldn't remember memorizing. The ground beneath Sasuke's feet erupted, and the Uchiha vaulted away before the edge of the cliff gave away completely, tumbling off into the water below. He felt it before he saw it, chakra licking away at his skin, the smell of lightning in the air. The cry of 1,000 birds taking into the air, and then Sasuke was barreling towards him from his left, Chidori awakened in his hand. He took a page out of Itachi's book and dove beneath Sasuke's guard, clasping his wrist where the electricity ran through his skin, driving the Uchiha into the earth and grounding his strike. Sasuke growled, enraged, jerking his hand out of the dirt and springing to strike at Naruto again. The blonde ducked and darted around his taijutsu, the air of his strikes just barely grazing his skin. The Uchiha sprang away, unleashing a flurry of kunai in his wake. Naruto dodged through the spray, catching Sasuke by surprise when he pitched right into him, hurtling them both into the ground. He lowered his blade to his neck, pinning him to the ground. What part of, "I'm not going to fight you," is not getting through your fucking head? Naruto yelled at the stunned genin beneath him. Sasuke opened his eyes, a livid red as heated and lethal as the inside of a volcano. "I'm not going to fight you," he repeated, calmer, catching his breath and getting off his knees, drawing his sword away from the Uchiha's carotid artery. "So, could you at least tell me what this is about?" he asked, beseeching. "Why are you even thinking about going to that guy? What brought this on? What did," he swallowed, and then, searchingly, "was it your brother?" Almost involuntarily, Sasuke's hands curled into fists, and the Uchiha got up from the ground, visible fury trembling in his shoulders. "Revenge?" Naruto stabbed again. "Is that what this is about? Is that what this is about?" Sasuke echoed, with incredulous disbelief. "That's what it's always been about. There is nothing else I live for, but the opportunity to kill that man." "That's not true," he wanted to shout. He knew that wasn't true. There was a brief, scintillating moment in time, a hand pushing him to the side, a body hovering over his own. "My body just moved on its own," that proved otherwise. Naruto searched the Uchiha's face. The utter impassivity was worrying, but he refused to give up hope just yet. He thought he might have another angle to play. It was a gamble, but at this rate he was running out of ideas. Well, Naruto consoled himself, if he fucked it up, he could always just haul Sasuke's unconscious body back to Konoha. It might just ruin their relationship forever, but he'd rather sacrifice the most important person to him, have Sasuke hating him forever, than have him dead on an operation table. Or worse, alive, with a snake inside him. Naruto sighed, a grand capitulation. "Well, I can't stop you if you've made up your mind." Wrong. He could grind him into the dirt and carry his sorry ass back home, but he was saving that as a last resort. "But at least hear me out." Sasuke sneered again, but he made no move to leave, hesitating at the lip of the waterfall. But Naruto would never get to say what he had planned, because in that moment Kyuubi derailed all of his machinations, overtaking them along with Naruto's conscience with his own in one fell swoop. Kurama took a breath, and promptly ruined everything Sasuke knew about his life. "Your brother was not the only one who had a hand in your family's death." If Sasuke noticed the radical change in Naruto's demeanor, he made no show of it, but for the slight narrowing of his eyes, too caught up in the words coming out of his mouth. "What do you mean by that?" he asked, deceptively steady. Kurama smiled, all teeth and sharp edges. "What, indeed? Tell me, did your brother ever give you any explanation for why he did it?" "Power." Sasuke bit out, as if the word physically pained him. "He did it for power. He said. He said to cling to my pathetic life until I had enough power to challenge him." "And is that what you want? Power? From Orochimaru?" Not Naruto tilted his head, snorting. "I don't think you'll find much there." Sasuke scowled. "What do you care? You're important to me, Sasuke." He crooned. There was no deceit to be found in his words. No, in this, Kurama and Naruto had the same goals. Sasuke was important, though in profoundly different ways. To Naruto, Sasuke represented everything he wanted: affection, family, approval. To Kurama, Sasuke was an integral part of his machinations, and someone he would not let go of lightly. The Uchiha faltered at the words, as if they managed to find him in a place he didn't want to be found. "And I don't think he did it for power," Kyuubi continued. "From what I hear from Anbu who knew him, and what he had encountered for himself, he, contrarily, seemed more like a pacifist." Anger burned over Sasuke's face. "You're saying I'm wrong?" "I'm saying he lied to you." Shock flittered over the boy's face, a broken visage of confusion and surprise that quickly shuddered into indifference. But Kyuubi could smell its deliberation. Could see it in his stance, in the hesitation which lingered in his eyes. But perhaps he was right to urge you to get stronger, for the people involved are strong indeed. And if you truly want to avenge your clan, it's going to take a lot to kill them. Sasuke searched his face. How do you know all of this? Consider me well informed. Kyubi brushed him off. One of them, I have already taken care of. Danzu Shimura. He was the man who ordered your brother to kill your clan. What? Sasuke's mind raced. He'd never even heard that name. Who is he? Was. Kyubi corrected. He was the commander of a defunct sect of Anbu, called Root. He and the Sandaime never saw eye to eye. You could say he had a very pragmatic approach to political issues that the Sandaime was not fond of. He was the one who ordered my family to die. Kyubi nodded. He was one of them. On his deathbed, he said Itachi made a deal with him to spare your life in exchange for the clans. His eyes flickered to Sasuke's face, which had long since lost its pallor. You see, the Uchiha clan planned to overthrow the Hokage. No. Sasuke whispered. They wouldn't. My family felt oppressed and undermined by Konoha. This isn't all that terribly surprising. They have always had a history of opposition. The Uchiha have always felt undermined by the Senju, even though both factions joined together to create Konoha. Kyubi appraised him indolently. You seem surprised by this. Did you never know your clans? Illustrious history? They were honorable people. Sasuke denied. One of the best in Konoha. They also mean to uproot all the progress of 100 years and start a civil war. Of course, the Sandaime wanted to solve this diplomatically. But, as I said, the Sandaime and Danzo never saw eye to eye. And Danzo, Sasuke swallowed, filling in the blanks. He decided to kill them all. Yes. His hands were shaking, involuntarily. He clenched them into fists, but now the tremors slowly overtook his body. He didn't want to show weakness in front of Naruto when had Naruto gotten so strong? So different? There was little to remind him of the Naruto he used to know. Nothing left of him in this indifferent face, inscrutable gaze giving nothing away. His feet had long since gone numb and nothing but his rapid heart reminded him he was even alive. He felt like he did all those years ago. Like someone had upturned the contents of his life. Others. He bit out, shaky. You said there were others. Surely there were others who added to that decision. Kurama mused. But there was only one who aided in the actual event. And at this, he had Sasuke's full, unwavering attention. Who? Kyubi grinned, though there was nothing particularly pleasant about it. Uchiha Madara. His eyes narrowed even more. And who the hell is that? A predatory smile grew slowly over Naruto's face. Now isn't that the question? His eyes bled, and Sasuke felt the floor drop out beneath him, a rushing vertigo as he looked into Naruto's eyes. The Sharingan? A violent pinwheel erupting from the inside of his pupils, something both incredibly disconcerting and vaguely familiar. It wasn't like his wasn't the three-ring tomo. It was something more. Sasuke's breath hitched. Naruto, how his eyes flew back to Naruto Snow, Kyubi's recognition coloring his voice. You can't be Naruto. No, I'm not. Not Naruto agreed. But we are one and the same. Not Naruto stepped closer, and Sasuke stepped back. He could hear the water behind him, a chaotic, continuous roar as it tumbled down the cliff. Who are you? Is that really of consequence? Not Naruto mused, before shaking his head. I suppose it is. I am the Jubith most powerful demon to ever exist. No, the most powerful being to ever exist. Sasuke gaped, but Naruto, the Juba continued over his noise of shock. Long ago, a man of great power, the first shinobi to ever walk this earth, bested me and split my energy into 9 parts. You may know of them as the tailed beasts. Sasuke swallowed. The 9-tailed beasts of legend. He acknowledged. They're not legends, then. No, not at all. Often, they are weaponized for use in their village. He pointed to himself. Weaponized through their Jinchuriki. As I am sure you've managed to deduce by now, Naruto is my Jinchuriki. His eyes drifted across Naruto's face, from the whiskers, to the alarming Sharingan spinning in his eyes. He'd never seen a Sharingan like it, nine-tomoe swimming slowly along paths of rings. So, his power is mine. He cut in. And then, somewhat begrudgingly. As well as his. It would be inadvisable to underestimate him. That doesn't explain how you have those eyes. His voice was almost indiscernible over the raging waters. The fox raised his brows. But it does. You see, long before the Uchiha clan ever existed, these eyes belonged to me. He drew closer, and Sasuke drew farther away, something intrinsic compelling him to stay far, far away from those unnatural eyes. He'd never felt more intimidated by a Sharingan before, but that was perhaps because he'd never seen one such as T-Sit went farther than that, though, as if something in his very blood told him to stay the hell away from this demon. However, I believe I've already told you more than enough. I think it's fair to say that you owe me something in return. What do you mean by that? Kyuubi smiled. Information isn't free. Sasuke's eyes narrowed. And what do you want in exchange? Well, Sasuke, I'm afraid I'm going to ask you for a favor. And then, tilting his head. 2, actually. Because he knew if he didn't at least bother to extract what Naruto wanted from this boy, there'd be hell to pay for it later. I'll hear you out. The Uchiha bit out. But I won't agree to anything until I hear what they are. Perceptive. Kyuubi appraised. The first, give up this asinine plan to join Orochimaru. If Naruto could best him so easily, he certainly isn't worth your time. I'm sure you must have heard the exalted tale of Naruto slaying his last remaining useful appendage and gouging out his eye. That being said, there are certainly people who are. Most of which remain in the village you were so quick to leave. Sasuke eyed him warily. When it became clear that these were the terms, he grunted, "Why does this matter so much to you? Why do you care?" Me? Kyuubi blinked. Or Naruto? The question struck him aback. Both. Well, it's astute of you to question my motives, but Naruto's, unfortunately, are quite genuine. You're his most important person, as I'm sure you must be aware of. He simply doesn't want you to leave him. Sasuke's eyes traveled up Naruto's face, unwillingly ensnared by the spinning tomo. They were as hypnotic as Itachi's. Sasuke wondered if this was all a dream, just another Tsukiyomi he had tumbled into. Mine is simply more practical. You want power, there is no shortage of it in Konoha. Not only does your village give you safety from your enemies, it can provide infinite knowledge, if one only knows where to look. Sasuke scoffed. I haven't found any place like that, not in that god-forsaken village. But perhaps you can. Kyuubi murmured, stepping forward once more. Sasuke had nowhere else to run. He could leap over the waterfall behind him, but that would be an obvious retreat. Trapped between the savage water and the equally savage fox, he didn't know which was more intimidating. The demon leaned in close. Sasuke flinched violently when he felt the wisp of his breath across his cheek. What if I had what you desired? The words took a moment to process. Sasuke too caught up in forcibly halting his urge to jump off the side of the cliff and away from the fox. He tilted his head slightly, his vision obscured by Naruto's plume of winter wheat hair. What do you mean? Power. The fox leaned back, just enough for his eyes to be the most luminous, alarming presence Sasuke could see, swallowing the rest of the world in darkness. It sounded like a deal with the devil. But wasn't that what he was about to do? Make a deal with the devil? Allow Orochimaru the chance to take his body for his own and in the process learn all he could from the snake? That in and of itself was a gamble. How was he to know that, by the end of the 3 years, he'd be able to overcome the Sannin? Was this truly any different? Kyuubi was undoubtedly the real devil out of the two of them. The true unpredictable force. Somehow, this choice felt infinitely harder to make than running away to the Sannin. But if he could so easily gamble his life on a man he had only met when he tried to kill him in a forest, how could he say no to this? Then give it to me. Sasuke challenged. Kyuubi's brows raised. You said you had the power you desired. Sasuke repeated, slow and deliberate, as if that would somehow obscure his absolute terror. Give it to me. This seemed to please the fox, as if Sasuke had played right into his hands. This is going to hurt, Kyuubi warned, a nasty smile gracing his face. He accidentally took another step back, and would have fallen into the water had the demon not shot out a hand to steady him, in the process dragging him closer. But don't worry, Kyuubi crooned. I'll be more gentle with you than I was with Orochimaru. Then he struck his hand into Sasuke's eye. And Sasuke screamed. Sasuke couldn't tell if his eyesight was any different. He didn't think Sabbat then again, he was having a hard time focusing on anything but trying to calm his hysteria. The blue sky had long turned tumultuous, how fitting for the occasion. The earth he lay on grounded him, and he fisted his hands into the dust, if only for something to hold on to. When he had finally stopped hyperventilating, he shifted his gaze to the demon cloaked in Naruto's skin. He didn't look all that different from Naruto, was the thing. Though he had never seen an expression like that on Naruto's face, nor had Naruto ever descended upon him with such inhuman fervor, moving to gouge out his left eye. Almost on instinct, his hand flew to the left side of his face. Blood had long since dried in thick rivulets against his cheek, matting his hair. But aside from a phantom pain, the intense agony of the entire ordeal had long since left. He shuddered at the absolute anguish of the entire event, something he'd have to relive in his perfect memory, for he had both Sharingan eyes opened. The burn had not yet receded completely, but Sasuke thought, perhaps, it had been worth it. Because in its place. He drew up a kunai, finding himself in the world reflected in the metal. In its place was a slowly spinning eternal Manjikyu Sharingan. Meanwhile, Naruto lay in the dirt not too far from Sasuke, having an anguished mental debate as he attempted to wipe his best friend's blood off of his fingers. Oh God, was that part of an eyeball? He shoved his hand into the running water. Best not to ever find out. You fucking liar. He accused, bitter and hollow. You said you had nothing to do with that. You were awake, then? Kyuubi mused, not even attempting to be apologetic. Yeah, I was, you fuck. Naruto growled. And holy hellcald, you have given some warning you were about to tear out Sasuke's eyeball? That only would have made it worse. Fine, maybe not for Sasuke but for me, okay? I thought I was about to have a hernia from that. The fox snorted, not bothering to reply to that. Naruto peered back to Sasuke, who was staring sightlessly into the gray sky. He squinted. You're not dead, are you? Sasuke's eyes slid toward him. One looked familiar, 3-tomoe swimming along a sea of red. The other was mildly disconcerting, an intricate pattern of swirling knives. No. He replied, distant. He seemed to be studying the blonde. Naruto wanted to look away. Instead he said, blunt as ever, I'm not the fox. Sasuke stared at him for a moment more, before snorting and looking away. Yeah. I can see that. The blonde hauled himself up to his feet, dusting off his pants. He stretched, cracking his back and finding an upside-down view of the sky. It looked ready to smite him with lightning. He stretched out his legs for good measure, even though that really wasn't much of a fight, and rolled his ankles. Finally, when he no longer had anything to distract himself with, he returned his attention towards the unmoving boy in the dirt, scratching the back of his head awkwardly. "Yeah, so. Sorry for gauging your eye out." Sasuke eyed him critically. Naruto thought he might just not answer, but then he got to his feet. "It's fine." He held a hand out in front of him, and Naruto could see the Sharingan in his left eye dilate and focus as Sasuke concentrated his attention onto it. He'd never actually seen one up close not like this. It was almost strange, how it looked to have a mind of its own. He was almost unprepared for the kunai thrown towards him. He ducked out of the way in time, startled. It soared over the edge of the cliff, plummeting out of sight. He turned back around, furious, ready to throw a few kunai of his own. However, Sasuke did not appear moved, staring at him with a curious expression. "Your eyes," he said, just before Naruto could berate him. "They're different, too." Naruto blinked, not expecting that. "How do you mean?" He could feel a flow of chakra around his iso. A subconscious reflex. Sasuke wasn't actually trying to piss him off. Or maybe he was, but for the most part it seemed he just wanted a better look at Naruto's eyes. They're not a normal Sharingan, either. Naruto frowned, and untied his Hitai-8. He rubbed the headband until the metal was shining once more, and drew it up to his face. The Uchiha was right, his Sharingan wasn't normal looking either. He stared down at himself, and nine-spinning-tomoe stared back. Unfortunately, Naruto had no idea what that meant, and didn't exactly feel up to pestering the fox about what the hell it was. Naruto didn't have a chance to reply, as two burning chakra signatures lit up on the side of his vision. He turned his attention towards the tree line, just as Yamato and Yugao dropped from the branches. He couldn't tell their expressions from the masks, but from what he knew of them he could imagine Yamato's face as one of amused exasperation, and Yugao's of just legitimate exasperation. They stalked forward until they came towards the two boys. Yugao eyed them both critically. "Hi," Naruto said, lamely. He could also imagine the deadpan look she was sending his way. "So?" Yamato greeted brightly, clapping his hands. "Am I going to have to drag you both back home in burlap sacks?" "We'll walk, thanks," he replied, dry. He glanced back to Sasuke, who was staring with an unreadable expression at all three of them. For a brief, terrifying moment, Naruto thought he might try to run again and they'd have to break his legs and actually haul him back in a burlap sack, but he followed suit after a beat. Yugao placed a soft but cautious hand on Naruto's shoulder, and Naruto jolted out of his thoughts at the warning. She wasn't looking at him, though, her mask giving nothing away, directed ahead of them. He thought the touch turned a little empathetic, but it was gone as soon as it came. Naruto turned to watch the Uchiha as he drifted out of the Hokage's office. It was a little concerning, how inexpressive the boy was being. Even Naruto, who had gotten quite adept at reading minute expressions from all his time in Anbu, couldn't get a strong read from the boy. He caught a few flickers of emotion when he caught the Uchiha's eye, but even those, he couldn't decipher. Fear? Apprehension? It was hard to say. Tsunade blew a raspberry, leaning back in her chair and flopping out of posture the moment the door closed. "Well, no harm no foul. That's a thing, right?" Yamato inclined his head. "He's young, yet." The captain agreed. "And more experienced ninja than him have fallen for Orochimaru's schemes, it'd be rather unfair to judge him solely off of this." All eyes in the room turned to the blonde ninja lounging on the window sill. Naruto blinked out of his reverie, averting his gaze from the door towards all the shinobi watching him. Yugao rolled her eyes at his untimely inattention. We're discussing your teammate, Naruto. She explained. Does he normally have an antagonistic propensity? Antagonistic? Naruto mused. Well, he's a jerk if that's what you mean. But obviously I'm a little biased on that. He paused, and tried to take a step back from all he knew about the Uchiha. It was hard, considering how many years he simultaneously hated and wanted to prove himself to the boy. Not to mention that he didn't even understand the person Sasuke had become. It worried him, actually. Had he ever known him at all? He's angry, Naruto said at length. And he wants revenge. Not all that surprising, I guess. But I don't think he's a traitor. Not after Kyuubi set him straight, anyway. I think he just wants to get stronger, and is feeling frustrated with the village. I'm not exactly helping. Naruto thought, morose. It was true, though, he doubted Sasuke had taken his resignation from Team 7 and subsequent promotion into ANBU very well, or rather, his pride hadn't. Tsunade rubbed her chin thoughtfully. Yugao, astute as ever, turned her gaze towards him appraisingly. Do you think you'd be any help in this? Naruto snorted. Doubtful. He shook his head. We were rivals, which was fine when we were both genin. Now that I'm not. He shrugged. And then, on an entirely different tangent, Kyuubi might be a different story, though. Tsunade frowned. Why do you think that? He shrugged again. He talked to Sasuke, back at the Valley of the End. We didn't fight at all, actually. They just had a conversation, and then Sasuke agreed to go back. Which was flimsy and he knew it, but he was hoping that he could claim ignorance on the subject. He doubted any of them would try to interrogate the real story out of Kyuubi, and he doubted even further that Sasuke would want to say much on the event either. He didn't like keeping secrets from his Hokage and his team, but what else could he do? He was about as much in the dark as they were in this. Had Kyuubi murdered that Danzo guy? It sure as hell seemed like it. And if so, why? And where the hell had he gotten that Sharingan eye? No, best to keep that to himself for now. Tsunade sighed. The fucking fox, of course. That could have some merit. Yamato appraised lightly, to the distinct horror of everyone else in the room. Really? Yugao returned, flat. Because I could also see how that could be disastrous. Yamato hummed. Well, that's true. He smiled. Then, but he was the one who returned the Uchiha, correct? Naruto nodded. Without any difficulties? Well, not unless you counted gouging his eye out. Naruto nodded again. That's a bit interesting, don't you think? And not in a good way. Yugao added, ominous. No one knows why. The fox does what he does, not even the Sandaime did. Hell, not even us, and I'd say we're a pretty fair evaluation, considering how much time we spend with the demon. Tsunade rubbed a hand against her temples. Well, it's both the worst and the best option. But let's consider some others for now. Now I don't think this warrants any legitimate discipline, but I do believe it's some cause for concern. Does anyone know why he left in the first place? All eyes, once more, turned to Naruto. How am I to know? The blonde balked. It wasn't like he was on the guy's team anymore, for that matter, that they ever had anything approaching a working relationship in the first place. Sasuke was the first and perhaps only person he'd call a friend. That didn't mean he liked the guy. Or understood anything of his motivations. Fair enough. Tsunade sighed. Perhaps Kakashi would be a more informative source. Yugao hedged. Isn't he the teacher? Naruto made a vague noise. It was possible. But if anything, Kakashi and Sasuke's relationship was equally as bad as Naruto's and Sasuke's. That said, Naruto wasn't very sure Sasuke had a relatively working relationship with anyone. Or, Yugao began again, could it have something to do with Itachi? That might be an understatement. Naruto muttered. Yamato turned to him. Why do you say that? Well, it's just. Naruto drew a leg up, resting his head against his knee with a thoughtful expression. Perhaps he'd been a bit hasty in his assessment, he did know quite a bit about the Uchiha. Not because the boy confided in him or any such nonsense, but simply from such close proximity to him. I get the feeling everything he does is to get better. He told us that his goal in life is to kill a certain man. I'm going to take a wild guess and assume that man is Uchiha Itachi. Yamato noted, dryly. So, what you're saying is this was a while coming? Tsunade's hand moved from her brow to pinch the bridge of her nose. Shizune. She barked to the door. Sake. A shuffling, and then the Hokage's assistant was pushing her way through the door with a bottle of sake. Naruto wouldn't have been surprised if she'd been waiting out there for some time in anticipation of this command. I guess. Naruto answered, somewhat sheepish. Now that she put it like that. He could see how this was sort of inevitable. Maybe it had even started in their mission to wave. That was the first and only time Sasuke had acknowledged him as a human being and as an even marginally worthy adversary. Not too soon after Naruto had been whisked off into Anbu, he couldn't imagine it was easy having to deal with Sakura alone. Not to mention Sai, who appeared as irritating as he did weird. And then the Chunin exams, the fight with Gaara, and the inevitable shit show that was his encounter with his elder brother. Tsunade downed her glass, waving dismissively. Fuck. Well, Kakashi can deal with him. She turned to the blonde. I have something more important for you to do than babysit a wayward Uchiha. Naruto shifted upright at that. Huh? He turned to his team, who looked at as much of a loss as he was. A delegation is coming in tomorrow. For someone so incredibly drunk, she looked rather serious. You're to be here for the meetings with me. Naruto's mouth opened in surprise. This sounded like bureaucracy. Why the hell did she want him involved then? Hokage-sama, Yamato interrupted. You assigned us to, yes. Tsuanda sighed. But I'm afraid you'll have to complete it without him. I'm sure Kamachi is out of the hospital, yes? This would be a good opportunity to ease her back into the swing of things. Naruto could tell Yamato wasn't pleased about being left out of the loop like this, however, in true testimony to his professionalism he only inclined his head slightly. As you wish. Turns out Kakashi was the one assigned to keep an eye on Sasuke. Naruto supposed it was the most logical, not to mention the least blatant obvious of all the options. Kakashi was their sensei, after all, it wouldn't look too out of place to see him wandering around behind the Uchiha. That said, Sasuke did not appear to have any motivations to break out of the village again. He looked, well, as sullen as usual. He also wasn't doing anything of significant interest, bought groceries, he wandered around the village, he stared at the lake for a stupidly long time. Naruto wasn't sure if he knew he was being watched, or he really was that boring. At any rate, Kakashi abandoned his post some time before sundown, and considering he'd left with Yamato in tow, most likely to go and grab some food before working the night shift. Naruto pounced on the chance to speak to the Uchiha alone. He'd feel a bit more guilty, but he was fairly sure Kakashi knew he was there. It was rather unlike his sensei to simply drop his assignment for no other reason than barbecue and sake. He dropped soundlessly out of the trees, as the Uchiha continued to half-heartedly fling kunai at a nearby row of wooden planks. He did not turn when Naruto intruded upon his silence, but there was a slight pause in his rhythm, giving acknowledgement to the blonde's presence. There was a brief, quiet moment in which neither of them said anything. Sasuke's arm dropped from its position, the kunai hanging loosely from his fingers, his face was turned in the other direction. Naruto blinked, and withdrew his hands from his pockets. In the next moment, Sasuke was flying at him in a spray of kunai and the blonde rolled backwards and out of the way. The Uchiha dove forward and drove a kunai into Naruto's forehead, but the blonde beneath him erupted into a cloud of smoke, and he whirled around to defend against Naruto's blade. He wasn't as unprepared this time, and expected the kunai in his hands to give as it melted beneath Naruto's blade. He threw a kick to the blonde's face that had the Anbu ducking out of the way. The blade caught against his arm in the interim though, slicing its way up his sleeve. Sasuke hissed, flipping backwards into a retreat. He spared a glance at his arm. A long, thin line drew its way up to his shoulder. Around it, burns had already started to form. He looked up again to see 5 Narutos running towards him. He blew a fireball at 2 of them, ducked around the third to stab it in the back of the neck, and numbly dodged the fourth before it could do the same to him. He dispersed that one with a shuriken hidden up his sleeve. The 5th, and the real Naruto, came last, and with a surge of red chakra he wasn't expecting. The acidic energy ate at the air around him, and he twisted violently out of the way to avoid its reach. It almost seemed to have a life of its own, extending past Naruto to burn through his shirt. He called up another Katan Jutsu, and the blonde dove to the side as fire erupted out of his hands. He didn't quite make it out of the way, and Sasuke watched with stilted disbelief as the blonde rolled upright and drew the fire into the palm of his hand, where it was swallowed up out of existence. He felt the Rasengan before he saw it all at once. All the air in the clearing churned itself into Naruto's hand, a blinding blue-white light erupting around him. He'd never seen a technique like that. Where the hell had Naruto learned it? He poured his chakra into his own hand, feeling the electricity crawl up his arm. The two met in an uncontrollable combustion of energy, rupturing the ground and taking violently into the air with a bright light. The explosion threw them both back onto the ground. Sasuke pulled himself off the ground, just as Naruto did the same. They couldn't be more than a foot apart. He could count the tomo in the blonde's unnatural red eyes. There were an unnecessary amount of twigs in his hair, considering they hadn't been fighting in the trees. His mouth was set in a grim line of determination. He didn't recognize this person anymore. The two pairs of luminous, inhuman eyes met, before Naruto drew his fist back and punched the Uchiha in the face. He didn't quite lose his balance, but when he recovered he held a hand to the side of his face, directing a scathing glare at the blonde. He wiped angrily at a trail of blood escaping from his mouth. "Are you going to explain anything?" Sasuke scowled. "Or am I to guess?" Naruto dropped to the ground, pushing his hair off his sweaty forehead. "I dunno," he replied mildly. "Are you going to try to fight me again?" His expression turned pensive. "No," he said, at length. This drew Naruto's curious look. The eternal Manjikyu spun slowly in Sasuke's eye as he held Naruto's gaze unwaveringly. Naruto wondered if his own eyes looked similar. It was getting hard to tell. Activating it was starting to become a knee-jerk reaction whenever he fell into combat. Around them, the training ground looked like it had gone through a war or two. Along with most of the foliage, they appeared to have also uprooted all of the grass. The parts of it that weren't upturned dirt were still smoking. "All right." The blonde shrugged. "What do you want to know?" Sasuke didn't even know where to start. "Why did you become Anbu?" Naruto blinked. That was not what he expected. "The fox," he answered. Sasuke gave him a long look. "Because you're a Jinchuriki?" "Something like that." Naruto hedged. "But you've always been a Jinchuriki," Sasuke countered. "Why now?" "The seal broke." Naruto shifted uneasily. "That may be inaccurate." He doubted it broke on his own. Kyubi had something to do with it, he was sure. "And we thought it'd be best if I joined Anbu." "And you?" Sasuke paused. "What are you two?" "That's a really great fucking question." Naruto smiled, though bereft of any legitimate humor. I don't really know anymore. We are one and the same, the fox had said, but that was in manipulation. It was plain as day to see how little Naruto and the demon resembled each other, which was to say, not at all. Just thinking of the demon made all the hairs on the back of his neck stand. I didn't want to think about their last encounter at all. The inhuman eyes that now swam in Naruto's, giving absolutely nothing away. Meanwhile, Naruto was practically an open book. That was reassuring, at least. Naruto frowned. Why'd you go to Orochimaru? Sasuke blinked. What? Orochimaru. Naruto repeated. Why would you do that? He scowled. The last thing he wanted to do was explain to Naruto that he was jealous of him. That Naruto could go from the dead last in his class to one of the strongest Anbu in Konohento, the kind of ninja that Chunin whispered rumors about when they lounged around, the kind that got dragged into the Hokage's top-secret briefings, whether voluntarily or no. He shrugged it off. Power. Naruto studied him carefully. Are you still? He asked, at length. What? Looking for power? Sasuke drew a hand up to his temple, pressing lightly at the pressure there, a physical manifestation of the Sharingan swimming in his left eye. Yes. He admitted. And then, before Naruto could reply, but there are other ways to get it. And your brother? Sasuke stiffened. Not even half a day ago he would have lashed out at Naruto for even asking, for even knowing anything at all about his life goal. But a cold numbness had washed over him, as he lay next to the blonde in the dirt, staring up into the wicked sky with a foreign burn in his eye. His entire life had changed, again. He didn't know what his life's goal was anymore. Revenge, still? The anger was still there, surely, just as violent as it had been before. Even though he knew that there were pieces of his clan's massacre that he didn't know yet, he still knew he needed to avenge them. I will avenge my clan. He swore, clenching his fist. Naruto eyed him appraisingly, waiting for him to elaborate. If that means I have to kill him, then. He paused, looking away with a determined visage. Then I will. He ended. And then, turning back to Naruto, but I plan to get the full story out of him first. And out of your fox. He added. At this, Naruto snorted. Good luck with that one. To Sasuke's curious look, we're kind of stuck in the same body right now and even I can't get anything out of him. There was a moment of silence as Naruto tossed his wakizashi between his hands absent-mindedly, and Sasuke's gaze had once more turned pensive. What's it like? He asked, suddenly. Naruto looked up. Being a Jinchuriki. Sasuke elaborated. He caught his sword in his left hand, holding it there as he thought on this. Where the hell would he even begin? It's all right. He couldn't even believe he was saying that. About a month ago he would have said the exact opposite. It was terrifying, the worst thing that ever happened to him. It felt like he was the only thing standing between the most powerful entity in existence and everything he loved. But Kurama was a lot more than just a violent amalgamation of energy. He might like to deny it, he might insist that he was the Jubi, a true beast made from nothing but hate and chakra, but Naruto didn't quite believe it. Maybe he had been that, centuries ago. Maybe he really had brought the world to its knees, tore asunder the sky with his jaws, the greatest calamity to ever befall humanity. But somewhere along the way, he'd changed. Someone had taught him how to be wise, resourceful, cunning. There were dreams that weren't his, full of anger and sorrow. Someone had taught him how to feel. That's it? Sasuke snapped, incredulous, when it appeared Naruto wasn't going to expand on that. It's all right? Well, no. Naruto shook himself out of his thoughts, rolling his eyes. But how am I supposed to answer that? I've been one my whole life. It's not like I know anything different. Sasuke frowned, mouth twisting. It sucked, for a while. Naruto played idly with the sword in his hands, pushing the hilt with his thumb until a sliver of metal glimmered in the moonlight. I hated not knowing why everyone avoided me. I guess it was relieving to realize it really had nothing to do with me, but the stigma of the Kyuubi attack. He shrugged. We've got, I dunno, an agreement, I guess. That doesn't mean I think he tells me everything, or that he doesn't have motivations of his own. That's an understatement, he noted, duly. Sasuke had seen the demon emerge from Naruto's skin only once that he was aware of, anyway, and it was infinitely clear to him that the fox played by his own rules. What does he want from me? Naruto laughed, devoid of humor. No fucking clue. And then, he can hear you. Sasuke blanched. That doesn't bother you? Naruto blinked. He set the sword down in his lap, pondering this as if the question had never struck him. Not really. And, let's face it. Naruto could probably win awards for obliviousness. It was probably for the best that he had a demon to closely observe all the details he'd never catch. But I feel like I should at least warn you in advance. He tossed his sword in the air, before pointing the hilt at Sasuke. We might have an agreement, but he's still got his own plans. Trust me on that one. Wherever you fall into that. Just, be careful. Sasuke scowled, but didn't say anything in response. Sound advice, surely. He couldn't imagine that a demon like that would simply give him this power, and for what? To appease Naruto's wish for him to stay in the village? He snorted. Unlikely. There had to be another reason the fox hadn't wanted him to go to Orochimaru. But for the life of him, he couldn't figure out what it was. Still, this was only proving Naruto's point. It was clearly foolish to fall so easily into the demon's machinations. Yet he could see the opportunity just as clear. The fox had already given him a taste of the power and knowledge he had. He could only imagine how much Naruto benefited from that, being the other half of him. A game, then. If he wanted the fox's power, he'd have to play the fox's game. Okay, Naruto blew a raspberry. So, can we stop talking about feelings now? Yes. Sasuke snapped, equally relieved. It was then that Kakashi ambled into the clearing, holding a bag of takeout. He took one look around the clearing, which was still smoking, and then to his two wayward students lying on a patch of upturned earth. He blinked. Do I want to know? Naruto wasn't sure where this left him and Sasuke, exactly, but he felt as if it was a significantly better place than before. After Kakashi had hauled the Uchiha away and reprimanded Naruto sternly for blowing up a training ground, honestly Naruto, you should know this by now, the Anbu team that uses this in the morning is going to be out for blood. Naruto had spent some time wandering around the village, before inevitably ending up on his roof. He figured the fox must be onto something with all this meditation and shit, and if anyone in the world was going to know how chakra worked it would probably be the fox. Unfortunately, he wasn't the most patient of ninja, nor was he particularly inclined to sit for long hours doing essentially nothing, so it wasn't working out all that great for him. What am I trying to accomplish here, exactly? Naruto whined, not even 15 minutes in. Finally the fox answered him, after almost an entire day without deigning to respond. He gave a grand capitulation. Honing your senses. Honing them on what? The world. Like that was helpful. Kurama gave an involuntary sigh, recognizing Naruto's confusion. He pulled the blonde's hands together, clasping them around each other. He gave the blonde a moment, and then, what do you feel right now? Like I'm about to sneeze. Well yes, the fox felt that now, but he scowled in irritation. Not that. He could feel Naruto's amusement, and knew the boy was having him on. He had no idea when the blonde's horrid sense of humor had started to become a source of fond exasperation rather than legitimate irritation, but he was still appalled with himself for finding it in good taste at all. You're doing something with my hands. The blonde noted. You're pulling chakra into them. Yes. The fox agreed, and then Naruto felt the very breath in his lungs escape him, along with the air in the space around in them, a violent wind sucking it all into his hands. His eyes widened when the fox pulled his hands away, revealing a perfect, blinding ball spinning rapidly in his hands. The Rasengan. Naruto noted, aloud this time. He wasn't entirely surprised. You used this on Sasuke. So I did. Naruto pulled his hand up, admiring the chaotic ball of energy. It spun contentedly in the palm of his right hand, as if waiting for him to throw it at something. He was almost tempted, if he wasn't so aware of the fact he was sitting on top of his own house, and that blowing it up would be somewhat detrimental. Kyuubi moved into his skin again, to take control of his hand. He closed it with a snap, and all the chakra dissipated, seeping into the world around them as if it had never been there in the first place. Now, you try. Naruto mimicked his first gesture, and clasped his hands together. He recalled the way his chakra poured from his core, crawling up to his shoulders and then winding down arms. When it reached his hands, it began to warm him from his fingertips down to his toes. He gave a shaky exhale and then slowly opened them. It was certainly harder than Kurama made it out to be, keeping the spinning energy moving but still as compact as it was proved to be more difficult than at first glance. He kept it up, though, until the Rasengan had pulled all the breath out of him once more, and the trees around his apartment began to groan ominously with the strain. Then he clapped his hands together and extinguished it. He flopped out of his meditative position, sprawling against the rooftop. As he caught his breath again, he entertained himself for some time counting stars, but eventually he kept counting the same ones all over again and he gave up. He peered up into the unending space anyway, squinting into the distance as if he could see through the abyss. Hey, Kurama, he began suddenly. What was the sky like? When you were the Jubi? This gave the fox pause. Naruto wondered if he'd actually managed to surprise him. He could almost feel him unwillingly star-gazing with him. Much the same. Kurama replied, reluctant, after some deliberation. Perhaps it has moved some, but for the most part the same stars from centuries ago are still there. Really? His hand moved on its own accord, drawing to trace against a soft speckling of light, far in the distance. He felt as if he should be more disturbed at how easily Kyuubi could slip into his skin. That one. The demon said. Naruto focused his attention onto it. That is Polaris. It has pointed north for. Perhaps for longer than this world has even existed. Longer than you've existed? Undoubtedly. Naruto hummed, reclaiming use of his hand to use it to scratch his nose. Even that felt fluid, instinctual, as if he had been the one to draw it up to the sky in the first place. How long ago was that? There was a long moment of silence, and for a while Naruto thought he'd lost the demon once again. I have taken many different forms. Kurama hedged. It is hard to say how much time has passed between. Forms? You mean, like the Jubi? Yes. The fox allowed. What was it like back then? Naruto breathed, absolutely charmed at the idea. He never cared much for history class. Irika made it sound like everything was an eternity ago, and also super boring. But Kyuubi was practically a living relic of the past. Naruto's imagination couldn't even begin to conjure up an idea of what the world was like back then. Endless war. Kyuubi answered, almost immediately. He frowned. This was a world long before ninja walked the earth, before chakra, even. Naruto's eyes widened. He hadn't even realized that a time like that existed. How could there be a time without chakra? Not even just ninja, but chakra itself? How could that be? He balked. Why did it change? Because a woman gained the forbidden power of the Shinju. Her descendants eventually became the Shinobi world as you know it today. Naruto listened with quiet rapture as Kyuubi told him of foreign lands and worlds that felt as if they could never have taken place here. He'd never heard this story before. He was pretty sure they never covered this in his Shinobi history class. He wondered if there was any other living being who knew of this ancient world. What kind of things had Kyuubi seen throughout the centuries? His teachings were called ninshu in many ways. They were similar to the jutsu you use today. Is that what you do? Use ninshu? He asked tentatively, referring to the chakra manipulation he'd seen the demon do more than once. Yes, something like that. Kyuubi hedged. Before continuing, he traveled the lands, spreading these ideals. He was revered as a god. Naruto digested this thoughtfully, as Kyuubi continued to explain the savior of the world, the Rikudo Sennin. The man in his dreams, he was sure of it. There was a brief half-dream in his memories, Kurama staring at him, at the Rikudo Sennin, with something like regret. Who was he? Naruto found himself blurting. What was his name? Kurama did not speak for some time. His name was Hagoromo Utsuki. He couldn't tell anything from the inflection in his voice, but something in his heart shuddered to a halt at the name. It took him a bit to realize that the feeling wasn't coming from him at all but from the demon housed in his skin. Why did that name mean something to Kurama? All of a sudden the moment fell apart, as Kyuubi sat upright. His head snapped to the left, where he seemed to scrutinize the indeterminable distance. A strange wave of emotion swelled over him, and wow, okay, that was new. He'd never been able to feel what Kurama was feeling before. Not that it was in any way helpful, it wasn't any emotion he could understand. What? He asked, warily. Around them, the night sprawled over the world in an impenetrable abyss. He belatedly realized his Sharingan had awakened. Even then, there was nothing to see. What's wrong? Wrong? Kurama echoed, after he seemed to shake himself out of whatever reverie had captured his attention so fervently. Not wrong. Simply surprising. Yeah, because that didn't sound ominous. There was a split second, and then Naruto couldn't feel anything at all from his demon. He pouted needlessly. Okay. Then, what's so surprising? You don't feel it? The demon replied. Feel what? The other Jinchuriki. The two other Jinchuriki, as it were. Naruto supposed that must have been why Tsunade wanted him there in the first place, for whatever meeting was going on. He was running a little late, after having spent most of the night stargazing. He couldn't exactly call it anything else, and he sort of felt a bit sheepish for completely missing some well-needed rest in favor of, what was in essence, staring blankly at the sky. Still, it was anything but unproductive. By the time dawn broke, he arrived through the window of the meeting room to see Tsunade throw a left hook into a large man's face. He gaped, shell-shocked, as the impressively built man dropped like stone onto the ground. After some moments, he drew himself back to his feet. In her brief time as Hokage, he'd seen Tsunade use a finger flick to throw someone through the wall before. This guy must be impressive to survive a full-on blow to the head. And then get up after like it was nothing. Even stranger, Tsunade didn't even seem all that mad. She crossed her arms, a frighteningly indifferent expression ossified into her expression. The man rubbed warily at his cheek that was going to leave a mark, possibly for forever, and didn't seem intent on retaliating. For his part, Naruto had no idea what the fuck he was supposed to do. Someone just hit his Hokage. He is a ninja of Konoha. He must avenge her. Though to that end, she seemed to be doing a fine job holding her own as it was. That, and the two ninja by the door, presumably companions of the weirdly large dude, hadn't made a move to step in either, and he figured he could take his cue from them. Tsunade caught him from the corner of her eye, tiling her head slightly in greeting. Ah, Naruto. You finally decided to show up. He wanted to point out she'd never actually given him a specific time to arrive, but manfully refrained. She didn't wait for a reply, gesturing to the man in front of her, who hadn't stopped appraising her silently. This is A. He's the Hokage. Naruto choked. His attention snapped to the two ninja in the back. One was tan, and wore a pair of sunglasses even though he was indoors. The other was a small woman with flaxen hair and a pair of piercing, narrowed eyes set affectionately upon a small nose and heart-shaped mouth. He'd think she was pretty, but she was staring at him like she wanted to take him out back and execute him, not take him out back and jump his bones. A tingle of energy pricked against his skin in waves, and he scrutinized them further. It was not an entirely pleasant feeling, but it was certainly familiar. He could briefly remember feeling something of the same when he'd first laid eyes on Gaara. These were the Jinchuriki Kyuubi had sensed, then. He said, lamely. Hi. The Hokage's attention slid to him, and Naruto found himself the unwilling victim of that appraising gaze. He refused to back down, though, matching his look. After some amount of silence, the Hokage blinked, snorting. Some guts in this one. Naruto wasn't sure if he'd passed some sort of silent test or not, and turned to Tsunade. She wasn't looking at him, though. You better have a damn good reason for setting this meeting up hell, for setting foot in Konoha at all. He looked like he wanted to fight her on that, but he was also clearly holding himself back. Very clearly holding back, if he let Tsunade punch him in the face and didn't even punch her back in retaliation. As I said, his attention returned to the Hokage. I want to put aside past differences. It was Tsunade's turn to snort. Yeah, awesome. She narrowed her eyes. Now tell me the real fucking reason. He appeared to be weighing his options. Finally, he motioned towards the two Kyumogaku nin in the back. They both stepped forward. A few days ago, two unknown operatives wearing cloaks of red clouds attempted to capture one of my shinobi. He gestured to the blonde woman. Tsunade raised a brow. And why the hell do I care? Because she is a Jinchuriki. Tsunade blinked in surprise. And I have reason to believe that they were attempting to capture her because of this. Her eyes flew hesitantly to her Hokage. When he nodded, she elaborated quietly, they mentioned something about a ceiling. I think they were trying to extract the Nikomata. Akatsuki. All eyes snapped to Naruto. That's the group you're talking about. He elaborated. Tsunade's eyes narrowed. Was all she said, not surprised at all. The Hokage's expression turned livid. He pivoted towards Tsunade, angrily. And you knew of them? He towered over her, and you did not forewarn us? In the space of a moment, an overwhelming wave of heat plumed into the air of the Hokage's office as Naruto's unsheathed sword hovered loosely against the Hokage's neck. In reflex, his shinobi returned the gesture, aiming their weapons at the blonde. His eyes slid to the Hokage's companions, a cold look to his face. They looked livid because he had his sword to their Kage's neck? Or maybe because he'd gotten the jump on them? It was hard to say. He lowered his sword slightly, and the searing heat of the room cooled noticeably. There was one long burn across the side of the Hokage's throat, but otherwise no indication that the heat had ever been there at all. You dare! The female Jinchuriki hissed. Naruto narrowed his eyes. You dare to threaten the Hokage? He echoed, annoyed, his attention moving to the Hokage, who still had not moved. In the middle of Konohagakure? As if this room probably wasn't full of Anbu in the shadows, just waiting for Tsunade's signal? Tsunade dropped a light hand onto his shoulder, and he lowered the weapon. The Hokage's look had turned speculative, all his attention diverted to studying Naruto. Almost absent-mindedly, he rubbed the burn crawling up the side of his neck. Tsunade sniffed. I already knew. She gave Yujito a sidelong glance. And then, to the Hokage's sharp look, you really didn't think we wouldn't keep tabs on the other countries? She raised a brow. Come now, as if you're not doing the same. 8th Raikage scoffed, and Naruto swore he heard him mutter something like Jiraiya. Huh. So the old pervert spy network was good for something after all. She gave a vague wave towards Naruto. This is Uzumaki Naruto. Every brow in the room rose at that and Naruto blinked again. Was he missing something again? Anbu? Aya praised, with no small amount of surprise. The shinobi next to him snorted. Kinda young, isn't he? Yujito crossed her arms, apprehensive. Reminds me of that Uchi. Yes, we know. Naruto interrupted, much to his chagrin. Anbu, yes. Tsunade spoke over all of them. And also, the Jinchuriki of the nine-tailed demon. This really gave them pause. The change almost seemed involuntary this time, as the chakra signatures from the two other Jinchuriki flared to life. It was also entirely imperceptible aside from a few blinks. Kurama appeared to look the exact same as Naruto. At first glance, they looked to be two relatively ordinary humans. But the tinged chakra seeping around them proved otherwise. Kurama tilted his head. Ah. Gyuki and Matatabi. Now there was an interesting pair. He never recalled them being particularly close. Would that therefore extend to their Jinchuriki? It didn't appear so. Then again, he couldn't recall a single trait he and Naruto shared. He narrowed his eyes at the Hachibi. He had often wondered if the second largest part of him would remember their days as the Jubi. Unlikely, though. They don't feel like you. Naruto noted, somewhat surprised. They're not strong enough. Kurama returned. As I said, am the largest part. How much larger? How? The fox made an irritated noise. It's not any sort of scientific measurement, Naruto. But it is a vast difference. Consider that all the power I had as the Jubi is split, but not equally. Half of it went to me. Perhaps a quarter, to the Hachibi. An eighth, to the Nanabi. A 16th to the Rokubi. Shall I continue? Naruto didn't answer for a moment, stunned. Wow. Okay. So you really are the largest part. I didn't realize it was such an exponential decrease. What would that make Gaara? You cannot measure it as such. The fox reminded. But, as it were, an infinitesimally small fraction, would assume. And even then, the Tsunagakure Jinchuriki had managed to cause so much damage. Naruto couldn't even begin to imagine the kind of terrifying power Kyubi was capable of. But do not give away our relationship just yet. Kyubi cautioned. Let me watch them a little longer. Fair enough. Naruto wouldn't have, anyway. Kurama redirected his attention back to the physical world. And why would Konoha forewarn you? He countered, to the party assembled. Considering your illustrious history with Konoha. And then, perhaps a bit smugly, and not to remark upon your illustrious history with Konoha's Jinchuriki. The Raikage did not look pleased. Tsunade's look turned furious. Naruto was absolutely confused. What the hell did that mean? He'd never met these people in his life. Naruto brings up a good point. Her voice remained flat and unaffected, but there was a dangerous undercurrent to her words. Why should we help you at all? Because this kind of threat cannot be allowed to continue. The Raikage returned. This group Akatsuki, as you say, has already ensnared our colleagues. My spies have informed me that old bat of a Tsuchikage brokered a deal with them for some mercenary work not too long ago. Tsunade's look turned pensive. She sighed, leaning against the back of her desk, folding her arms across her chest. Well, you bring up a good point. But don't consider this forgiveness. She added, scathing. I agree, Akatsuki is too large of a threat to allow to go on. I'm willing to call a truce on this, but only this. That's all I ask. replied the Raikage. "B, you said?" Tsunade turned to the equally large man next to the Kage. "And Yujito?" The blonde nodded. "Well, it's good to meet you both," she greeted, giving a nod of acknowledgement. They bowed in response. "As I said, this is Uzumaki Naruto, the Kyuubi Jinchuriki." As if finally allowed to, be split into a wide grin. "Nice to meet you, kid." "Likewise." Yujito echoed, rolling her eyes at his enthusiasm. Naruto returned his smile. "Yeah, you too." Though he was somewhat confused. Not that he didn't want to meet other Jinchuriki, quite the contrary. But what motivations could Tsunade have in introducing them? She turned back to the Raikage, sighing. "Well, if we're going to do this, we're going to have to get everybody else involved." The Raikage scowled. "Yeah, I know." Tsunade agreed, warily pinching the bridge of her nose. "I'm not looking forward to it either. I'm assuming I'll have to be in charge of logistics." She blew out a breath. "We can discuss matters further later. As it is, I'll need to debrief my shinobi." They took their leave not soon after, but not before the large Jinchuriki pulled him aside. "You've got guts, kid," he began, smiling. "I like it. I want to see what you're made of." He rapped his knuckles against Naruto's chest. He almost reeled back from the amount of punch held in such a small gesture. Definitely not the kind of guy to underestimate. And then, waggling his brows. "Next time, we'll duke it out, yeah?" "For sure." Naruto returned his grin. The amiable man gave him a salute as he followed his kinsman out the door, leaving Naruto grinning stupidly at the door. Naruto was not surprised at all to see at least 24 Anbu emerge from the shadows the moment the Kyomonin's chakra signatures flickered in the distance. He couldn't read their expressions, as they all had masks, but he thought he might be getting the hang of this whole honing your senses thing because he could feel a tangible unease in the air. "Well," Tsunade began, dry. "I'm hoping I don't have to repeat any of that. Any questions?" The crowd made no move to reply. "No?" "Awesome." She soldiered on. "The true reason for this alliance is to be kept only to the people in this room. The official statement will be drafted up later, but I don't want the public at large aware of Akatsuki's intention to collect all the Jinchuriki. I don't want to even think of the clusterfuck that would be." He tried to read the atmosphere in the room. He could tell there was no small amount of curiosity directed towards him. Perhaps more surprising was the lack of ill intent. He was fairly used to at least one person in a crowd staring at him in contempt. She clapped her hands. "So, everyone's good?" "Yeah." "Okay, now get the fuck out of my office. It is way too early for this bullshit." He caught Yamato's eye across the room, and his captain gave him a surreptitious nod. Naruto wasn't entirely sure what it meant, but it felt reassuring. He lingered there as his fellow Anbu dissipated into smoke, until nothing but shinobi smoke was left. There was a tingle in his stomach, and then, like a wave, he could feel Kurama's presence drape over him. The fox turned to the Hokage, who did not seem at all concerned with the fact he had stayed even when she'd ordered them all to leave. "You wanted me here for a reason, Hokage-sama." And, wow, could Kyuubi pull off his voice well. Even Naruto could barely tell the difference between the fox and himself. "I'm sure this wasn't an unintentional coincidence." Tsunade smirked. "You really are sharp, aren't you?" And then, scratching her chin, "You know, I heard you were kind of a moron." "Hey!" he protested, though it went unheard. In direct contrast, Kurama only smiled. "Oh, well, I probably deserve that title," he said, sweetly, "the little fuck." Her smile strayed after that. "You're right, though," she harumphed, leaning back in her chair and propping her feet on her desk. "Jiraiya had warned me beforehand about the incident. As you know, he's keeping tabs on Akatsuki. So when the fucking Raikage comes in to see me, well, I figured that was the most likely reason why. Kurama tilted his head. Why bring me? Intimidation? A show of power didn't seem quite like Tsunade's style. What did you think of them? Tsunade returned, seemingly on a different tangent entirely. Kurama paused, and then receded to allow Naruto to answer the question. They seemed okay. Naruto shrugged. Why? Tsunade rubbed her temples. The ninja world is broken, Naruto. Traveling through the borders has only made me realize this more. And Akatsuki is only capitalizing on this weakness. My ancestors are probably rolling in their grave, but I'd rather see a peaceful resolution. If combining forces is what it takes, then perhaps it is time to put aside past differences. Naruto opened his mouth, stunned. He closed it after a beat. That's really wise of you, Hokage-sama. Don't call me that. She snapped, instinctual. And then, slumping into her seat. I hate this job. Naruto smiled slightly at that. For someone who was so vocal about her displeasure, she was surely made for the position. He'd want to do the same. If he was in her position, he'd want to extend the olive branch. The Jinchuriki seem nice, he said at length. Well, the girl didn't seem to like me all that much, he amended. Tsunade, why did you call me here? Would it not be beneficial for you three to meet? Tsunade countered. This is not the kind of threat to take lightly. The tailed beasts are truly the most powerful forces of nature. The very idea of someone trying to collect them all, for whatever reason, doesn't bode well with me. She added, serious, I want you to look out for each other. A pipe dream, I know, considering the state of affairs the 5 nations are in today, but, you know, better to stand together than apart. Naruto blinked. That was surprisingly mature of her, diplomatic, even. Honestly, he was stunned. He hadn't expected her to be that good at being Hokage, but maybe he could learn a thing or two from her. If there was one thing he still undoubtedly needed to learn, it was diplomacy. Then he grinned. This position is really rubbing off on you, isn't it? Fuck. She cursed in agreement, waving her hand in the air. Shizun. Sake. So, Naruto began sometime after they had left, in a voice that was way too casual to be coincidence. What was that back there? What was what? The fox returned, distracted. That above all else proved something was amiss. The fox had never in the entire time Naruto had known him been anything approaching distracted. That. Naruto replied loudly. You, right now. You're all speculative. What are you thinking about? Again, Naruto thought the fox would decline to answer him. Perhaps it was testimony that he did. I'm thinking I need to retrieve something I had lost. You lost something? Naruto guffawed. What, like 5 centuries ago? He snorted skeptically. Yes, something like that. Kurama replied, absent-mindedly. Naruto sputtered. He'd been joking. He hadn't actually thought. You realize that 500 years ago is a really long time, right? Whatever you lost is probably long gone. Kurama chuckled. And yet, that sword in your hand says otherwise. Oh. Naruto looked down, his fingers fluttering against the sword, almost possessively. Right. Agreed, cowed. He frowned suddenly. Wait. So is this thing you lost something like this sword? You know, like some cool artifact? Yes, as you so eloquently put it. They are quite useful. They? Naruto echoed. There are 5. And unfortunately, I do not have nearly as good of an idea of where they may be as I did the sword of Hagoromo. Naruto nodded absently, before he almost tripped on his own feet. Wait. He righted himself quickly. He was lucky this training ground was utterly deserted, or people would think him weirder than usual. This. He held the sword again, staring at it as if he'd never seen it before. You didn't tell me it was that, he began, flustered. That dude's sword. Kurama snarled, vaguely irritated. Have some modicum of respect, Naruto. But yes, that sword belonged to the Rikudo Sennin. His gaze trailed down the slim weapon, the pristine hilt that did not appear to have weathered half a millennium, the long glistening black arch of the scabbard. He unsheathed it, and watched the sunlight catch upon the edge of the metal in wonder. He returned it to its scabbard, reverently readying it to his belt. So, we're looking for these artifacts? He began, returning to their prior conversation. We are. And then, as if it physically pained him, if you are up to the task. Naruto blinked, taken aback. You're asking for my permission? He asked, incredulous. I'd prefer you to be aware and consenting, yes. Unfortunately, this task may take a number of days, as I do not know the exact location of the relics. However, I will be able to detect them at some distance. Great. Naruto harumphed. A treasure hunt, then? Kurama bristled. These objects are infinite value and each of them is an almost limitless source of power. They are more than just mere treasures. He sneered. Okay. Naruto returned, sheepish. So, let's go find them, yeah? He lay on his back, staring sightlessly into the same ceiling he'd seen since perhaps even his birth. It hadn't changed. There was a slight and almost inscrutable dark stain in the left-hand corner from an accidental leak. Countless pockmarks from kunai and shuriken lay embedded into the wood from all the times he had listlessly lodged them up there, young and bored and waiting for Itachi to come home and train with him. His hand curled into a fist. The ceiling hadn't changed. But he had. The world dipped into startling clarity as a familiar burn crawled behind his eyes. He thought he could feel a minute shift in his chakra towards the left. He may just be imagining it, though. Almost absent-mindedly he drew a shuriken from his pocket, studying the profile reflected in the metal. Between the glare of the moon and steel was one slowly spinning star. It looked nothing like Itachi's, or at least, what he could remember of it, nor did it look anything like Naruto's. A Sharingan completely of his own. With it activated, he saw movement in the corner of his eye. Sasuke turned slightly. A figure dripping in moonlight emerged from the frame of his window, indeterminable but for a pair of inhuman eyes. He lowered the weapon, curious. Hey! Naruto grinned, cocking his head to the side. How do you feel about an adventure? Yamato pinched the bridge of his nose. Naruto had only seen his superior do this once before, and it was not an event that boded well. He hoped he didn't end up like the last Guin pieces on the floor. How long, did you say? His captain asked, again. Naruto shrugged. I'm not entirely sure. This did not look to be appeasing him. But he do know they're supposed to be in Kumo. He backtracked hastily. So, at least we have a location, right? Naruto. Yamato started, flatly. Do you have any idea how big Kumo is? Yeah. Naruto replied, voice small. Yamato gave a sigh. Well, I don't know whether to commend you or whack you over the head. Naruto blinked up at him, confused. On the one hand, you did ask permission first. I don't know whether I should be thanking you or the fox. And, this may actually work for our favor. Naruto brightened. Really? Yes. Yamato nodded. I'll talk it over with Hokage-sama. I think this could be a very useful experience for you. And Konoha. Yamato lead him out of the Anbu HQ with a firm hand on the back, marching him all the way to the Hokage tower. The old bat still had a glass of sake in front of her, but she appeared weirdly sober, considering this was the fourth time Naruto had seen her drinking in the past 4 days. She didn't look at all surprised to see them, waving them in with a resigned hand. Hokage-sama. Yamato greeted, with a strange amount of cheer. I have a proposition for you. She raised a brow, shoving her stacks of paper out of the way, and looking relieved for the interruption. Ah, Yamato. What can I do for you? I'd like to give Naruto PT. He said, smiling. For an unspecified amount of time. She raised her other brow as well. Naruto, for his part, had no idea what kind of game Yamato was playing. Yamato, she began, sounding amused. I hope there's a punchline in here somewhere. Oh, there is. Naruto was starting to get downright frightened. He'd never seen Tenzu smile so much. You see, Naruto wants to go hunting for lost artifacts in Kyumo. Her look turned incredulous. With Uchiha Sasuke. Now it looked downright consternated. And I was thinking, Yamato continued, before Tsunade could interrupt. It might be good for them. You did say that leaving the Uchiha with Naruto was both the best and worst option, and Kamachi could still use some time to readjust before we send her off to another team. She opened her mouth, but he continued on smoothly, not to mention, I think that gallivanting across the Kyumo countryside sounds like a grand idea for bonding, don't you? He gave Naruto a jovial glance. I dare say Yujito and Naruto will either simultaneously commit seppuku or become fantastic friends by the end of it. Naruto's mouth dropped open. Tsunade did not look mollified in the slightest, though she did appear thoughtful. That's putting a lot of faith in the Raikage, isn't it? Both the Uchiha and Naruto in his territory? That's not even remarking upon the questionable sanity of our last remaining Uchiha. She pointed out. It's a gamble. But it may be a good opportunity to see how willing Kyumogakure is to commit to this alliance. Yamato agreed. And I think Naruto is mature enough for it, no? Naruto flushed and the prideful look his captain gave him. Naruto, maybe. Tsunade hummed noncommittally. He is Anbu. The Uchiha though. Yamato turned to him. What was it you said you were looking for, Naruto? Naruto startled. He hadn't actually told anyone yet. He definitely hadn't said anything about it being entirely Kurama's idea, and that the only reason he was going along with it was because the idea of owning 5 artifacts of almost unlimited power sounding like a great plan to him. Fortunately, his alter ego took the opportune moment to swiftly take over. Secret Jinchuriki Jutsu scrolls. He lied smoothly. Jiraiya mentioned that many of the lost Uzumaki clan scrolls were smuggled into Kyumogakure not long after the destruction of Uzushiogakure. I think they might be helpful for me, all this considered. And Yujito as well. In fact, it might be helpful to find them and spread the knowledge to all of the Jinchuriki, if you really are considering an alliance with the other villages. Yamato and Tsunade took this at face value. Meanwhile, Naruto had felt his blood grow cold. Uzumaki clan? Uzushiogakure? What the hell was Kurama talking about? Why had he never heard of either of those before? And why? Why did both his Hokage and Anbu captain not appear at all shocked by these revelations? So the old hermit actually does something while he's out there. Tsunade snorted. Ah, well, I suppose, if your captain is all right with it. But I'll warn you to keep your guard up, Naruto, this is highly unusual. I'll get in contact with the Raikage for extra protection when you reach Kyumogakure, but this is a long way from home. She pierced Kyubi with a hard glare. Kyubi only blinked back. This is your first leadership role in a mission, I expect you to act accordingly. The Uchiha is both your comrade and responsibility. Fuck, I suppose I'll have to promote him to Chunin for this. Tsunade grumbled. I can't let a genin out for this. And there's no way I'm letting you traipse through Kumo without any contact. Yamato, I want updates every 2 weeks. The ANBU captain nodded seriously. You're not worried over another attempt to steal both the Konohagakure bloodline as well as the Jinchuriki? Kyubi questioned, his voice unnervingly light, tilting his head. Oh, I am. Tsunade replied, flat. I'm counting on you, Fox, to make sure that doesn't happen. Kurama smiled. Very perceptive of you. Naruto would never be so eloquent. I'll keep that under advisement. Tenzu turned to him, looking mildly concerned, as if appalled he hadn't been able to see the switch. His curling smile fell flat. Is that all then, Hokage-sama? It is. She narrowed her eyes. Yamato moved towards him, cautiously, still studying him closely, as if he wasn't quite sure who he was speaking to. Well, I bid you a fond farewell. He said, at arm's length. I know you'll take care of him. Outwardly, Kurama appeared expressionless. But something like resolve hardened in Naruto's chest, and it didn't seem like his. It'd be in my best interests, no? Kyubi tilted his head. All of them. Yamato added. Kyubi scowled. Unfortunately, he still had use for all 4 of them. Naruto, of course, was integral to his plans. If the boy perished, he would alongside him. He'd already gone through great lengths to keep the Uchiha, and he needed the other Jinchuriki out of Akatsuki's clutches if he wanted to use them as his own. Having Gyuki and Matatabi was a minor setback, but nothing he couldn't maneuver through. And it was well worth it to have the blessing of Konoha for this. He had no intention of making an enemy of them if he could avoid Itoff making any enemies, for that matter. Not when his plans were already so close. He managed to finally break through his seal, had tamed his tenant into something approaching complacency, and was now on his way to collect Hagoromo's treasured tools. No best to allow them to believe of him what they will. Yes, all of them. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to like and subscribe, and don't forget to share this video with your friends. Guys, make sure to help the author by visiting the link in the description. This is Fox Sage, and I'm signing off.